Oh, good morning. 3 minutes after 10 is the time. Could we guard against... Can we call it the politics of envy? I don't know. I find days like this really interesting. We often ignore them. Blue chip bosses handed 16% pay rises amid Bank of England calls for restraints on wages. I think that part of the reason why I've decided to go in on this is because it's on the front page of the Financial Times. So I do occasionally suffer from what you might loosely describe as a slightly undergraduate approach to wealth distribution. It sometimes seems to me pretty straightforward, the prospect of making things fairer. At this point, I think it's traditional to talk about Northern Europe or Scandinavia in particular, and also, of course, to talk about multiples and the exponential increase in the big multiple between what a boss is being paid and what everybody else in the company is being paid. Or you just take the lowest wage on a payroll, never mind the average. So they generally take the average and then see what multiple you need to get to the boss's wage. And now, as of today, that multiple, I think, is 118. That's 118. I'm showing your age there if you just suddenly thought of a sort of Yellow Pages type phone line. 118? No? 118, yeah. 118. So 118 times. So what's the average income in your company? It's James. Okay, times that by 118, and that's what the boss is on. That's what the chief executive is on. Now, when I was growing up, certainly when I was very young in the 1970s, that figure I think was closer to. I think it was still around 20 at the. I could be wrong. I need to check. I do some of this stuff from memory, but what you have seen since 1979 in this country, and others, but not all of them, is an absolutely phenomenal movement of income, not just wealth, from the workforce to the boss, or from the rank and file to the top. And what makes it particularly interesting this year is the fact that the rest of us are being told, obviously, that the pay rises that we think we deserve, or I'm not going to kid anybody, am I really? I'm not quite in this category myself, but the pay rises, because my pay rises, such as they are, will be linked to audience size and things like that. So I'm not a median worker. I'm not an average worker, but everybody is being told by the governor of the Bank of England down that pay rises are unaffordable because they add to inflation. So it means, of course, also that workers on average, workers suffered a real terms pay cut last year because inflation was bigger than wages. So look, if everything you buy is going up by 8% and your wages have gone up by 5%, that's a pay cut in real terms. I know in real terms sometimes sounds like a bit of a smoke and mirrors tactic, but it's pretty straightforward when you think of it. Two things about inflation that I find very interesting, even as I get older and marvel at how I haven't come to a slightly deeper understanding of these things. The first thing about inflation that is politically interesting, as well as personally, is that when they talk about inflation coming down, it's not quite the cause for celebration that you sometimes think it is. So inflation is down to 8%, say, from 10, and you go, yay! But actually, it's still 8%. it's still. Anyway, that's the first thing I find interesting about it. And the second thing, of course, is that if inflation is higher than a pay rise, an annual pay rise, then you are, not getting a pay rise by any meaningful measure in terms of how far the money goes and how much is left at the end of the month. So it just struck me today that if there were ever going to be a year where you would expect this inexorable divide between boss and worker, this inexorable shift of income from workforce to boss, it would probably have been this year. And yet here we are. There are also calls in the city for board remuneration to be raised further because the UK apparently is struggling to compete with other countries, particularly the US. The top 500 companies in America are paid far more than their UK counterparts, receiving on average about $14 million in 2022. And when I said at the outset that I wanted to conduct this in a way that didn't sound undergraduate or simplistic or even politics of envy, I did mean it, because it is not beyond the realms of possibility that these individuals are worth these sums of money. It's far from a given that there's something suspect or shenaniganish going on. But I genuinely don't know. So the people I know who have, so the median pay is just shy of £4 million a year. The people I know personally who sort of knock at the door of this world I have either started their companies themselves from scratch or have demonstrated skills that have been rewarded in the marketplace. But I don't know people who move from one to another. Do you see what I mean? That idea that there is this... I'll tell you what really interests me about this story and about these facts and these statistics and these figures. What really, really interests me is the notion of there being a threshold above which or beyond which you are laughing, right? So here's 100 people. They all start as graduate trainees on the same day at 100 different companies. How many of them get to this level? What are these people superheroes? Are they genuinely geniuses? Are they possessed of a skill set that is truly remarkable? I'm thinking of sport, right? I'm thinking of Cristiano Ronaldo, Lionel Messi, Ashley Hemmings. I'm thinking of superb footballers. And I'm thinking that it is measurable, you know, that you see Harry Kane going to Munich, and you know why they're paying several more zeros for him than they are for so that idea. It's not impossible, is it, that in the realms of business there are people possessed of skills that truly justify these absolutely enormous salaries. I really like this analogy. I'm very pleased with this. I hope it doesn't fall apart before 10:15. So what are these skills? 0345 6060 973. Because most of us might as well be talking Mandarin on a morning like this. $14 million income for an American CEO. 4 million quid, give or take, for a British equivalent. And that figure of 530,000 annual pay rise in the last year. These numbers are breathtaking. But it's the qualifications. It's the... Well, I like the word threshold, the threshold over which you get. So I don't know who's going to be able to ring in today, frankly. I don't know if anybody is, but presumably there'll be people listening who know more about this subject than I do. That usually holds true, whatever the subject is. It's why the programme is so popular and successful at the moment. It's got very little to do with me and everything to do with you. So what first of all is what is it that makes somebody worth this sort of money? 0345 6060 973. What is it? And second of all, I've got to get this right, okay? You're in a business and you're doing what everybody else does. You're working and you start rising up the ladder. And you know, you're doing really well now. You're thinking, oh, crikey, we're going to pay off the mortgage sooner than I thought. Or I'm going to get myself a fancy sports car or something like that. And so you're doing well. Or you're just ticking along. But then there's this super league. There's this door, this magic door, this invisible door. And when you go through that, you are being paid in telephone numbers. How do you get through that door? So are these people worth it? What are the skills? How do you get through? Because even if you've got the skills, is any of this making sense? I hope it is, because I'm absolutely fascinated by this subject, but I can hardly ring myself. You've got this door. You've got these. How do you get through it? How you watch it? Because there'll be people who are brilliant, just like there'll be, you know, they find a brilliant footballer playing. They found Ian Wright playing on Hackney Marshes on Sunday mornings, didn't they? And he was absolutely brilliant. So it can happen. There could be somebody there who's got all the skills that are needed, and they're currently driving a bus. So how do you get? What do you do? Go on, give us a ring. Help me out. You can tell that I need it. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. I don't want to bombard you with questions, but I just find so many elements of this story interesting that I am going to throw a couple more into the mix, and then I will try, clumsily no doubt, to boil it down to 3 or 4 invitations. But can you explain the gulf between a boss and the average UK worker? Can you just explain to somebody why a boss gets 118 times more money every year than the average UK worker? And so that is probably a broader question for you to answer, just an understanding of business, economics, the rest of it. Why does a boss get 118 times more than the average worker? Okay, that I mean, might be fair, it might be reasonable. That's question number one. Why does it happen? How has this happened? 118, not 10 times, not 18 times, not 30 times, 118 times more than the average worker. All right, 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. Where is the door? What's it like when you're in a business? Where's the threshold over which you move into telephone number salaries? Can you tell? Do you know where it is? How does it happen? Is there a secret language? Don't phone me about secret handshakes. But is there some sort of secret? You see what I'm puzzled by? 0345 6060 973. And then with football as the analogy, are these people worth it? I'm going to cautiously suggest they must be. Otherwise, this wouldn't happen. I don't know whether that makes me sound naive or a stater of the bleeding obvious. But surely they're worth this kind of money if they're getting it. 0345 6060 973. So talk to me about, there's only three things here. Talk to me about the multiple. Talk to me about the threshold, how do you get, and talk to me about the skills. What are the superpowers that you possess in order to be one of these people? Okay? Hit the numbers now. You will get through. And don't hold back on this, because I suspect this might be a subject that you'll be most helpful to us if you don't normally ring radio phone. If you say, well, I think I'm able to help this weird chap out on the radio. I just want answers to questions that I've never asked before. 0345 6060 973. It's 18 after 10. There's a lot going on here in this. Mick in Sutton Coldfield picks up on a point that I think merits further examination. High wages of bosses, James, particularly in regulated industries, have historically been justified by the fact that they're the ones held responsible when things go wrong. But as we have seen with both finance and water companies, this is false. This is part of this sort of drive towards unregulated unaccountability, which is what, in my opinion, all the Tufton Street types dream of. But we're talking about FTSE 100 bosses getting an average pay rise of £500,000 in 2022, and at least three questions prompted by this annual revelation. The first is, how can the boss get 118 times more than the rank and file, than the average worker? What gets you into that category? What is it? What gets you over that line? And then finally, linked to both of those questions, are they worth it? Are they like footballers who are worth the ludicrous fees and salaries that they receive? Tony is in Wimbledon. Tony, what would you like to say?
You mentioned the issue about are they worth it?
It's gone a bit L'Oreal. It's all gone a bit L'Oreal already, hasn't it? I'm worth it because I'm worth it. Go on.
Yeah, the industries that they're in are generating that type of money at the moment to justify the type of pay that they're wanting to give them. What I argue, particularly in the area of the financial service sector, which is where we tend to see some of these big mega wages, is that finance once was part of a wider chain of what was commerce. What has happened with that, particularly since the deregulation, what was called Big Bang, is that we've seen the merging of lots of financial entities into larger financial entities which generate more money, and the star players in those industries are then able to command more money. I think that this, as it is, will continue, but equally I think it's very important to remember that it's at the expense of the wider economy.
Why is it? I mean, you're not really answering the questions that I asked, which is fine, because you're still being interesting, but why is it at the expense of the wider economy?
Well, when I look at what's happened in Britain, for example, where does this money actually come from? The money is pulled from the wider economy that exists at the end of the day. Now, finance will keep putting money into finance, and that's why we've got...
Yeah, I've got to steer you back, because it's not all financial companies. I mean, the only woman on the list is the chief executive of GlaxoSmithKline, for example. So obviously they make all their money from selling stuff and inventing stuff and then selling the stuff that they've invented. So I understand your attitude towards the people who are in the business of money and money alone. The sort of, it's how Rishi Sunak made his money. All they do is move money, and make money and move money and make money and then take money and then move money and make. And I get how that is fundamentally hollow. And in a planet with finite resources, the notion of infinite growth is palpably absurd. But if you're earning 40 million quid a year while pretending that infinite growth is not palpably absurd, I understand why you keep quiet. But I don't think it's the answer to all of the questions that I'm asking. I'm not even sure it's the answer to any of them. By the laws of natural justice, are these people worth the money that they're being paid? And by that I mean compared to other people. So here are 10 people, here are 100 people, here are 1,000 people. That one there, that 1 in a million person there is a FTSE 100 executive on £4 million a year. Is he exceptional? Is she exceptional compared to the other 990 people in that queue?
No.
Why not? And how do you know?
How do I know? Because look at what a bus driver does. Look what a nurse does. Look at perhaps even what you do at the end of the day. It's just where the focus has ended up being put upon.
No, because there's 1,000 other people who would want to do that. Everybody would want to have a crack at that.
Hold on a second. So the people who get through through a degree of luck, perhaps ability, etc., they are able to shine in those particular industries and those particular sectors.
No, you're just saying words now, Tony. Of course you're saying they're able to shine in that particular industry. They're a chief executive of a FTSE 100 company. But what makes them different to the other 999 people that would quite fancy that job?
Well, the people who selected them liked them.
Well, thanks for that, mate. There is the question. What is it? What is the characteristic, the skill set? Maybe there isn't one. Maybe it is mostly luck, but it seems highly unlikely, and you'd be found out pretty quickly. I think you would. It's the other thing you're never quite sure about. I always loved those shows on the telly. Do you remember those shows on the telly? Was it Chris Searle who did one? And I think what's the Welsh fella called? I really like him. Rod Gilbert did one, I think, where you just go off and try a job. And they film you doing it. I always fancied doing something like that. And one of the jobs I'd like to have a crack at would be trading or finances and seeing what's it all about. What's the skill set? I just don't know. And then, of course, you've got 1,000 traders on a trading floor. What is it about the one that ends up running the place that makes her or him different from all the other ones? Thank you, Tony. Tim's in Cornwall. Tim, what would you like to say?
Yeah, hi. So I used to work I'm retired now, but I used to work with a couple of the major technology companies from the US at a high level. Worked in the USA and I also worked in the UK as well. And the thing that stood out, we used to interface with big business and big companies around the world selling our technology.
Right.
And what you would notice is someone who had invented their company or was leading their company and it was their company, they're the special people that really have that secret sauce.
Yeah, that's the phrase. In 24 minutes, that's the phrase I've been looking for. What's the secret sauce? Go on, love it.
And then you'd meet the old like British American Tobacco, Unilever and people like that, and you'd see the senior management up to the CEOs, and they literally are there because they went to public school, their dads knew the right people, they went to the right university, they networked with people at the university, and they got their jobs because of that. They were catapulted in at a high level. But the government, with all that lot going to eat and stuff, is the same thing that goes on in big companies, and they do not deserve the money they get in any form whatsoever, because they also get a massive security blanket of pensions, they get shares, and also if you're at that level, you're literally being looked after. In other words, your house is paid for, your food's paid for, you're being ferried around in a car, and you're literally out wine and dining nearly 6 days a week.
Okay, I recognise a lot of what you say, but here's the thing. That there will be lots and lots of people who went to exactly the same schools who haven't got through the secret door, who haven't found the secret source. So it can't be just what you describe.
It's family connection as well.
It can't just be that. It can't just be that. And I think, funnily enough, I think that a former chief executive of British and American Tobacco did actually go to my public school. So I wouldn't want to cast any aspersions on his commercial acumen, but there's lots of other kids went to my school who will never get anywhere near that, even though they might quite like to.
Yeah, you're still going to get the people that, excel and are good and have a passion for work,
Yes.
and they will rise up. But to get 120 times the average salary of someone in the street, it's gone too far. Back in the 70s and 80s, we had even then we moaned about it. But today it's gone too far because they get other breaks as well. And this is the whole problem with the rich getting richer and the poor getting poorer. You're building up this massive issue that's going to hit us somewhere down the line where people just go, enough. Why the hell am I working? Why am I doing this? And I'm surprised in the UK we're not taking to the streets like France are.
Well, yes. I mean, I don't know that France are taking to the streets about this particular issue, and there are days when it seems they'll take to the streets about anything. But the problem, I guess, post-regulation, post-Big Bang or wherever you want to date it from, when Thatcher deregulated the city, is that if you and I are sitting in a room, Tim, and we have just been gifted the power and freedom to essentially write our own paychecks, then we're going to do it.
Well, absolutely, because humans are greedy.
So that might be part of the secret. Part of the secret sauce is an absolute. I don't know if it's sociopathic or simply greed, but just to sit there looking at a business, looking at your workforce of 2,000 people, and working out how little you can pay them in order to keep more yourself.
I agree. I mean, but there are some people. I mean, I'll be honest, cards on the table. I worked for Microsoft for a long time.
Never heard of them. Never heard of them.
and Mr. Gates, I got a lot of admiration for him. He was derised in lots of things, and they did some practices that weren't always brilliant.
Of course.
But at the end of the day, he gave away half of his wealth to create a charity.
Yes.
Whereas Jeff Bezos used it to get to bloody Mars or something rather than pay the Amazon workforce.
Yes.
And I've got to say, Microsoft were always fair. The way they treated people, the pay scales were always brilliant, and just the work-life balance was brilliant as well. So there are people that, the top person's the right person. They will cascade it down through the organisation.
And the political, I suppose both of the men you mentioned should also have paid a hell of a lot more tax, ideally. So there is a political dimension to this as well.
There is, but then you've got to look at it. If you've got to look at, the accountants here, the accountants are the ones making the money, and their job is to make you tax efficient and save money. And if they're not saving you money by making you tax efficient, you don't employ them.
You'll sack them and you'll hire a different accountant. I like this. There's a circularity. And I enjoy the secret sauce enormously, Tim, but I would have thought that distinction held. The difference between somebody like Bill Gates, who started off in a garage, building stuff, and ends up one of the richest men in the world, or Jeff Bezos, who similarly started that. There's there, but then we're not really talking. That's like that's like when they tried to set up the Super League above the Super League. Do you remember when they tried to start that? But generally, your FTSE 100 person, so far, the consensus would seem to be, it's at least as much about luck as it is about judgment. Couple of phone lines free now, 0345 6060973. What is the secret sauce that explains why some people end up earning 118 times more than other people in the workforce? Because I truly don't believe that in the massive majority of cases that is morally justified. But, of course, what footballers get paid isn't really morally justified. It's about what the market will allow. But on a football pitch, you can see it. There's no doubting what the skills are. You know what the secret sauce is when you see a superb athlete lucky enough to be gifted in a sport where there is a lot of money swilling around, dancing past 8 players and scoring a goal in the last minute. You know exactly why the money is going where the money is going. Whether it should or not is the moral dimension. Whether you can understand why it is the intellectual dimension. And I think we can. But when we look at this, when we look at boardrooms and businesses, most of us perhaps can't. What are the skills? What is the equivalent to going past 8 players and scoring a goal in the last minute? Because if you can explain that to me, then we find the secret sauce and we conclude that the remuneration packages are worth it. 10:30 is the time. Thomas Watts is here now with your headlines. 10:34 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Footballers service billions, hence a lot of profit. These CEOs provide products and services to millions and billions. In both cases, a lot of profit can be garnered. Nurses, for example, might look after 12 people on a shift on a ward, and therefore there's low pay. None of it is correct or fair. The world is upside down, and these record payments mean massive profits, all in the middle of a cost of living crisis. Yes, I get that, Scott, in Kenilworth, but you couldn't swap out the footballer for somebody else. and see the same revenues come in. You wouldn't win as many trophies. You wouldn't be as successful. Whereas when we look at some of these people, I don't know what the special sauce is, that you could swap them out for someone on a fraction of the money and the company wouldn't suffer at all. But once you get over this threshold, once you get into this club or whatever you want to call it, then you only swap them out for each other and they write their own I don't know. I just think well, anyway, we're having a good old chat. Martin's in Esher. Martin, what would you like to say?
Hello, James. Yeah, I was really on side with you in terms of could you recruit outside the cohort of the Super League, to bring people up. And I'm ex-City, I've had many kind of Machiavellian, narcissistic, controlling bosses up the pike.
Let me pause there, if I may, because I know that was a bit of a throwaway line, but that might be significant in and of itself, because that might be one of the characteristics that we're talking about in order to...
That's what I'm thinking,
yes.
Yeah.
To succeed on that level, to move it to a point where you're looking at someone who's on a very modest income and trying to find ways to make it even less so that you can have 50p more. That's not commonplace, that attitude.
Yeah. And it's not very humble. It's not very human. It's not very kind. It's not very, a lot of bosses don't possess those kind of skills,
right.
And they don't care.
No.
They are rather cold.
I've been very lucky over the years. Is that so? I distracted you a bit. Was that the point you were ringing in to make? You're actually looking at those characteristics.
Well, I think those characteristics. I've been listening a bit to Jordan Peterson, who seems to be an amazing source of.
Whoa! We were getting on so well. The man's a complete plonker.
Like okay.
Absolute plonker. He's got. Have you seen the quotes on the back of his latest book? Everyone who's been quoted has complained that they've lifted words that completely contradict the review that they gave to the book.
Maybe I've watched the early ones then.
Well, maybe.
There were certain things he said that resonated, but I think a lot of it's like right time, right place. The door opens, then you get into that. Then it's how you embrace that opportunity.
Yeah, that makes sense, and that would tie in.
You become when you've got that opportunity,
and you need to be. So they would call it ruthless, and we would call it callous, or they would call it. I don't know, robust, and we'd call it sociopathic. Yes, I hear you. Thank you, Martin. 10:37 is the time. Leon is in Dresden. Leon, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. How you doing?
I'm good, thanks. I'm interested in this subject. Very.
I am indeed too. I'm waiting for the book as well. So.
Oh yeah, well that's it now. We're good. We're good to go. November the 2nd. It's all happening.
Well, that's good to hear. Awesome.
It's the phone line. It wasn't me. I thought it was something wrong with me then. I'm in my ears, but the phone line is kicking in and out. We'll try and sort Leon out imminently if we can. Just a reason is a quote from Jordan Peterson. The idea that women were oppressed throughout history is an appalling theory, Julie reminds us. So, you can do better than that, kids. Wayne's in Tame in Buckinghamshire. Wayne, question or answer? Question or answer, Wayne? What would you like to say?
So yeah, I've got. I think I've got an answer for the question of why they're worth this much.
Go on.
And it's been briefly addressed before. It's my first time on the radio. I'm a bit nervous.
Oh, don't be. It's only me, Wayne. Seriously, you've got nothing to worry about. We're all in this together.
But I remember reading a book several years ago called "Are You a Psychopath?" One of the things I was genuinely worried about when I was younger, believe it or not.
Yes.
But in the book, the author posited, or speculated, I should say, a significant proportion of the bosses of these top businesses showed traits of psychopathy.
Was it John Ronson's book, The Psychopath Test, rather than Am I a Psychopath?
Yes, that's the
there
one,
we
yes.
go. Yes, I've also read that book. It's absolutely brilliant, isn't it?
Yeah. I remember sort of being blown away a little bit while I was reading it, and surprised that I wasn't a psychopath.
And probably relieved, I hope, Wayne. Well, relieved as well, I hope, Wayne. Can I inquire, without being indiscreet or unduly inquisitive, can I inquire as to why you worried that you might be a psychopath?
So it's because I have sort of a couple of neurodivergencies, shall we say, including ADHD, and my mother thinks hints of Asperger's, although I've not been diagnosed with it. And
so because you understood that other people processed information differently and you didn't quite know why you did it in the way that you did, this was one of the words that you thought might fit your divergence.
Yes.
Okay, that makes perfect sense to me. And you're clearly not a psychopath. So, I mean, trebles all round on that one, Wayne. So just for people who...
I guess.
Do you get a badge, do you think?
I hope so.
For people who haven't read the book, just give us a quick thumbnail sketch of the kind of characteristics that would see you, in some circumstances, come to the attention of the authorities, and in other circumstances, end up running a massive company.
Of course. A few of the traits obviously differ in their in their scale. So one trait that would be good for a boss would also be great for a criminal.
Yes.
For example, but the main ones are a lack of empathy, which you can definitely see with bosses of big companies. A delusions of grandeur, which, let's face it, you don't see yourself as a boss if you don't have that.
Yeah.
And the other main
biggies.
one.
Go on.
Yeah, they're the two biggies.
And delusions of grandeur. That bit there is. It's a thin line, isn't it, with insecurity, trying to prove to yourself that you're not worthless, trying to prove that if the world starts treating... I'm thinking of Donald Trump, actually. If you just as
you were saying that, I was just thinking of Boris Johnson.
Well, they're both probably case studies. I'll tell you what, next time I see John Ronson, I'll tell him he needs to do a sequel for politicians. Because it did look more, didn't it, at people in business and I think law and order. Wayne, that was a brilliant debut, my friend. Thank you for that, and thank you for that recommendation. I can't just keep plugging my own book. That is a superb book that he mentions. It's a couple of things, and it's a while since I read it, like Wayne, but a couple of things that I remember. You think these people it's an absence of conscience or an absence of empathy, which is no way going to describe everybody on the FTSE 100 chief executive roster. But if you're looking for the special sauce, it might be a flavour, a variety of the special sauce. But you look at someone and you think, well, he can't be unempathetic. He clearly loves his family, or he clearly, in one case in the book Wayne references, he clearly loves his Dobermans. But what Ronson explains is that even a wife and children can be an extension of the ego. And certainly dogs can, pets can, belongings can. Everything can be an extension of the ego. So the desire to impose your ego on the world, which can be, I think, sociopathic or psychopathic, can encompass other people. So, I guess that might be a fairly neat introduction to the phrase trophy wife, actually. If it's a trophy, you love the trophy. You don't necessarily love the wife. Leon's in Dresden. Where were we, Leon?
We were just saying about your book and how brilliant it is.
No, stop that. That's enough. Carry on.
Oh, okay. Okay, no worries. I'll get quick to the point because I got problems with the line earlier.
Go on.
I believe that the CEOs or the high-class FTSE 100 leaders are always, for my eyes, they're, first of all, rebels when they start off.
Yes.
So they fight for the people to get power.
Okay. Yeah, okay. Because you need to be held up on the shoulders of others to get to that.
Yeah,
rung.
You curry favour, don't you, with people around you, so that you get pushed into that sort of viewpoint where all the shareholders and all the other leaders can say, "Oh, he's a good guy."
Yeah.
And then you go into that position, and then I'm going to say the D word, but the D word is dictator. You become effectively dictator because even though your primary goal, I reckon, from what I can see and what I can observe, is to please the shareholders. Secondly, please your customers who buy your product or whatever they consume, and then the employees on the bottom.
And that takes us back to what Wayne was describing. Really, is that you couldn't do that if you were overburdened by whether you want to call it conscience or empathy or Catholic guilt or whatever else it is. Correct. You couldn't do it. I'm thinking of something as basic as sacking people who you don't need to sack because the company's perfectly profitable. But if I sack Keith, then my wages will go up. I'll start pressing all the buttons myself. I couldn't do it. Look at his little face. But that's it. That's why I'm weak, because I'm looking at Keith's little face, all broken and teary, and I can't sack him. But I should do, because I get more money and the show would be slicker.
Exactly. You'll be in the ivory tower and you don't have to who are people? You know?
Yeah,
these are just numbers.
Be,
Number 5, there needs to be sacked now.
That's it. So what the mistake I've made? It's why you should never name your chickens, because then you have to eat them. I should never have said Keith's name on the radio, because it's given him a sort of emotional value, hasn't it, in the minds of myself and the listeners.
He'd get a new job, couldn't he?
He could do, I suppose. I mean, not a very flattering picture. Maybe this, if you're listening as a FTSE 100 executive, you're thinking this is just envy. Listen to these plebs. Listen to these little people. Listen to these civilians. They will never understand the magnificence of my skill set. And then he could put his little finger just in the corner of his mouth and go, like that. But you know, I've worked for some brilliant bosses over the years. I haven't worked for many, but the ones I've had have generally been exceptional. So there are also special sauces that are delicious for everybody. We're not getting to the nub of that issue yet, particularly. 10:45 is the time. It's 10:49. Dave's in Bristol. There's no evidence that chancellors have clawed their way to the top, James. Just look at luminaries like Jacob Rees-Mogg and Nadine Dorries. And with them in mind, it seems self-evident that they're worth every penny. We should do a Dorries watch today, actually. It's been so long now. I've almost lost the sort of thread of it all. Never mind the numbers. And sticking with the text, I like this from Julius, who is in Weybridge. Personally, I've met more psychopaths than superheroes at the top of all sectors of business. This is likely a reflection of the toxic business employment environment here in the UK, which itself is likely based on the ingrained master-servant nature of UK employment law. And I like this as well from Sean. There's a great line in the latest Netflix movie about McDonald's when Ray Kroc says, who I think is one of the founders, says, if I see a competitor drowning across the street, I'd walk over and stick a hose down their throat. Can you do that? That's why I'm international and you'll always be local. So it's not just the sociopathic callousness, it's also a celebration of it and a pride. I don't know, this is a pretty unfair depiction of business titans. I'm sure there are more positive readings. Speaking of positive readings, Keir Starmer is going to be joining us shortly, talking about the affordability of university, what Labour might do to address the fact that in the current economic climate, he doesn't think he would have been able to go at all, which I guess is of a piece with the conversation we had at the end of last week about class and his departure from Tony Blair's apparent insistence that there's not really any such thing anymore, and Starmer committed to the idea of helping people who've got the least, which is kind of pertinent to the conversation we're having now. Millen's in Paris. Millen, what would you like to say?
There's two things that should determine the value of your wage, and those are your productivity and the value of your work.
Yeah.
You can break productivity down into how hard you work and your skill. And if you ask the question, do the top paid in the UK work 118 times harder, or are they 118 times more skilled than the median worker? The answer is almost certainly no.
Yeah, but I think you're already wrong.
Why is that?
Well, I mean, you put me in a slightly uncomfortable situation, but I only do 3 hours a day. Everybody else who works on the programme works harder than I do in terms of hours, and not necessarily productivity. But if you swapped us round, the show wouldn't be as good.
No, but that's due to your skill. That's the difference. That's the second factor in productivity, which is skill.
Oh, yeah, carry on. Yeah.
The question of, are you 118 times more skilled than Keith?
Yeah.
I mean, you're skilled in different ways. So it's sort of.
I think he's quite a bad example. He's quite a bad example.
I won't comment, but.
But no, you put it in a nice little relief, actually, because 118 times, that there's no way if we swap jobs, the show would be 118 times worse than it is already. It would be considerably worse. And I could not do Keith's job. I could not do. I mean, I could with some training, but I'd need quite a lot of training. But apparently Eleanor doesn't think I could even do it with training. Whereas he could do this. He could just come in here and blather for 3 hours. You know, there might be some uncomfortable pauses. So that doesn't quite. That's the difference. So skill is, under your analysis, skill is covering a hell of a lot of territory, isn't it?
Sure, yeah. But then you've got the third factor, which is the value of your work.
Yeah.
So if skill doesn't explain the pay gap, and hard work and diligence doesn't explain the pay gap, that must mean that value does.
Yeah.
So I really want to pose the question: we live in a society in which the work of a CEO is valued at 118 times that of the work of a nurse or a doctor or the average median worker. And that's what the question really comes down to.
Because all we're valuing is money, really.
Yeah.
And that's why it has the moral dimension as opposed to the intellectual, but the moral dimension is murky, isn't it? And that's why I'm looking at the footballer thing. So that's skill. I don't know that the equivalent in the boardroom has the skill on the level that an athlete does, or you know, someone, maybe an author, or someone in the media. What is the skill? What is the special sauce in the boardroom?
The special sauce is the fact that you're there.
Yeah,
You're going to have the same distribution of ability amongst CEOs across the FTSE 250 as you are in normal workers.
I would have thought so, but not necessarily the same distribution of personality traits across the whole population, which keeps popping up, and we keep coming back to it. Millen, thank you. Ian's in Manchester. Ian, what would you like to say?
Hi, thanks for taking the call. I think most people are on the similar sort of page as to what gets them there, and it's a mixture of sort of skill set and look and whatever it might be, and timings. The bit I'm ringing about is about how the disparities got there and how it's got to such a, you know, you talk about from 20 times to 118 times.
Yes.
I probably come at this no way in terms of a CEO board level, but someone who's probably earning more than they're worth and probably more than I thought I would do in that role. And I think part of it just comes to, it's not about the number, it's not about it's 118 times or it's 100 times. It's about what the guy next door's, you know, in a similar role's earning, or, you know, what drives the ego, if you like. So I know, for example, I'll get a bonus at work that's a bigger number than I ever expected to deliver.
Right.
I'm not looking at what the number is. I'm looking at what
everyone else got.
In the other department does, or how it works. And somehow, that cycle's got to break. So I think, you know, so the CEO board, you talk about earning 140 million or whatever a year, won't do anything because he knows that, I don't know whether it comes into that thing, whether it's the ego driving him, whether it's
just the nice work if you can get it syndrome, isn't it?
I don't think it is. I just think it's the system.
I could be paid a tenth of what I'm being paid, they might say, or a half, you know, and it would not impact in any way whatsoever upon the quality of the job that I do. But who is going to do that? Yeah. Who is going to do that? And then, of course, already in the third or fourth paragraph of the Financial Times story that prompted this whole conversation, there are concerns that we're losing out to America, and that city remuneration packages need to be bigger here. So you'd want to know, wouldn't you?
It's the wrong narrative, isn't it?
Of course it is. But it's their narrative. They write the narrative. Because what you want the company. All right, show me the company now that's got someone running it on £5 million a year, and all the shareholders and all the board members are kicking themselves that they can't get someone better because all the Americans are paying loads more money. It sounds like a sort of pyramid scheme almost when you put it in those terms. No, you've just got to give me a bit more money, just a bit. Yeah. I need more money, otherwise I'll be off to America. And where are you going to get it from? Well, you're going to have to pay the workforce even less and give me even more. That's what I meant about the secret door, Ian. Once you get that threshold, you get into that club, you get into that world. All of this makes perfect sense.
People aren't trying to get into that door for the 118 times or that money. They're trying to get in there because, I don't know.
Because they want to win. Because they want to win.
Yeah, and some just fall into it and don't want to win. It's just the way it works. So it's frustrating, but you haven't, until you're going to have structural change of actually.
Well, you need to impose from without.
I think that should happen in our work is there should be transparency of what everyone's earning. So actually, the guy who's earning, so I'd be uncomfortable telling people I manage what I earn. Yes. And that's not right.
No, I guess not. I guess not, because then, I mean, you have gender pay gaps as well and other issues as well, and
just embarrassing of the differential between someone who's doing probably as much work as me but hasn't been lucky enough to get into
not getting rewarded for it, or didn't play hardball in the negotiation, or didn't go to school with the head of HR or whoever it is that sets salaries. There's a lot going on there, but you say those words about public, everybody knowing what everybody else is on, and I automatically think about BBC presenters. That was one of the worst things that could have happened to the BBC, was publishing the amount of salaries that they get paid, not because it upset colleagues or anything like that, although there may have been a little bit of that, but because it just gave so much ammunition to right-wing media run by billionaires who don't disclose anything that happens on their payrolls, and it just put the BBC in a really tricky position, which is, I'm thinking chiefly of the Daily Mail and Rupert Murdoch, obviously, at that point. And the Tories did that for essentially to keep sweet their commercial supporters. 10:58 is the time. And the reason I mention that is because I shouldn't let that put me off the broader benefit of what Ian just described. Last word on this to Stuart, who's in Oakworth. It's going to have to be very quick, Stuart, because I've got the Leader of the Opposition coming up first after the news.
Okay. Well, basically, for me, I've been in sales for 40 years, and I've seen straight away at the base level the people that are going to get to that stage, to that chief executive, COE, because they're a different kind of person. They are totally motivated by money. They will stamp on your fingers. They're not a team player. It's all about me.
But there's people working in Currys who are like that. I mean, do you know what I mean? There's people everywhere who are like that. It's what turbocharges some of them compared to others, do you think?
Well, I honestly believe that I always used to think when I started in sales, I'm in it for the money. Yeah. And then I got told one day, you're not, because if for what you earn, you're not on a bad little wage. But if you were truly in it for the money, then you wouldn't be in this job. You'd be working for the Citibank or something like that. And I think a lot of these people at the top, if they were made of chocolate, they'd lick themselves. And they don't want anybody else getting to the position that they've got at.
I mean, I see some sense in what you say. I don't know that even if you and me did decide that we wanted to be gazillionaires, that we would necessarily sort of become so simply by dint of wanting to. But you describe a sort of single-mindedness, and if you were to attribute it to a psychological defect, it would be the belief that if I can just earn that bit much more, I'll be happy. And that sort of ties it in with all sorts of other issues. 3 minutes after 11 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Talk a lot on this programme, arguably a little bit more than perhaps we should, because it's areas that I find so fascinating, about social mobility, about education, about class. And, well, so does Keir Starmer. In fact, increasingly so. Today he has rebuked Prime Minister Rishi Sunak for holding back British ambition and talent, describing the economy as stuck in a low-growth trap to such a degree that he says that if he was 18, 19 now, or expected, he'd just got his A-level results, he wouldn't have been able to study law in Rishi Sunak's economy. And Keir Starmer joins me now. How did you work that out?
Good morning. Well, I was looking at the cost of living that is over and above the fees that you obviously have to pay these days at university, the energy bills, the food, the everyday things, and reflecting on my own experience. We didn't have a lot of money when I was growing up. I worked before I went to university, and that gave me a bit of a buffer. But in if the cost of living crisis that we're now living through were the position when I was just picking up my A-level results, then I don't think I would have been able to afford to go to university. And I just bear that out, James, because this morning I've been in Worthing and talking to a group of residents here. Two of them, in fact, were young women who got their results, their A-level results last year. They're both 18, they both want to study law, as it happens. But they've both taken the decision to defer for a year because they don't think they can afford to go now, so that they can work to build up a bank of money. So I'm reflecting on my own experience, but actually talking to two 18-year-olds today, they bear out basically what I'm saying. They have had to take a decision about their own futures, which is to hold back because they can't afford to live in Rishi Sunak's cost of living crisis and go straight to university, which is what they'd prefer to do.
What would Labour do differently?
I think we've got to get to grips with growing the economy, and that means having an absolute clarity about what we're trying to achieve, and the how as well, which is a partnership with business to get there in every locality. And just to give you an example of that, James, the one thing that I was talking to these two women, I was talking to businesses here in Worthing, talking to a mother with a 1-year-old living in a 1-bedroom flat. They all talk about the energy bills. We've got obviously to have a short-term answer to that. We've said cap those bills using the excess profits of oil and gas companies, but we've got to have a more long-term answer to that, and that's why I've set out that an incoming Labour government will have an absolute mission to clean power by 2030, and that means lower bills on a permanent basis and a stable basis, so that tyrants like Putin can't put his boot on our throat. Next generation of jobs are bound up with that, energy security, and of course important towards our net zero obligations. So we've got to have a government that's got a sense of driving mission, rather than sort of being sort of wafting around in the wind with no sort of sense of drive or purpose. And I think that all the people I talked to this morning, or talk to anyone anywhere, I happen to be in Worthing, and say what's the most important thing at the moment. They all say the cost of living crisis, and they know there's a massive mismatch now between what the government seems to be saying, things going reasonably well, and the lived experience of so many people in this country.
I hear you. I'm going to have to interrupt, I sense. But speaking of wafting in the wind, I remember a Labour Party leadership candidate in 2020 who promised to maintain the Labour Party's commitment to abolishing tuition fees. Obviously, I haven't had the pleasure of talking to these two young women today, but that was shortly before they did their GCSEs, and I suspect that would go a heck of a lot further in their plans than warm and encouraging words about the cost of living crisis.
Well, I'm not sure from the two women I spoke to this morning that that's entirely right, because they're concerned about
that's why it's unfortunate that I haven't been able to speak to them, but I do remember a Labour leadership candidate called Keir Starmer pledging to abolish tuition fees just 3 years ago. What happened to that?
Yeah, well, look, I do think the current scheme is unfair and ineffective, and that's why we will change it. So the current scheme will be changed by an incoming Labour government, and we'll set out our plans. But there's no getting away from the fact that in the intervening years, the last 2 or 3 years, huge damage has been done to our economy, and we therefore cannot make funding commitments that we can't, costs that we can't show where the funding is coming from. We know, if you look at what Liz Truss did, she experimented with, unfunded commitments. In her case, it was tax breaks for the wealthy, and you saw the impact on the economy. One of the women I was speaking to this morning, two-income families, said their mortgage is going up £600 because people are still paying the cost. So I'm not going to pretend that there isn't huge damage to the economy, and that has meant that some of the things that an incoming Labour government would want to do, we are not going to be able to do in the way we would want, when we would want. But it doesn't mean that we're going to leave the current system as it is, because we want a fairer deal for students and a more effective deal for students and for universities.
Any clues as to what that might look like?
Well, we're working up the proposals on that, and I'll happily come back and talk them through when we've got them through.
I look forward to it.
We will. Yeah.
Speaking of productivity, what would you do if you had a backbencher who hadn't turned up for the sort of periods of time that Nadine Dorries has been absent without leave?
I think she should just go. And I've been in Mid-Bedfordshire talking to some of her constituents.
That makes one of you.
Well, I know. I mean, we've got Peter Kyle there, who's the MP for Brighton. He's our political lead in Mid-Bedfordshire, and he's doing more work than Nadine Dorries up there. But she's got to go. She hasn't been representing them for a very, very long time. He's much more effective than she is, by the way. But she said she'd resign with immediate effect. I don't know what her dictionary definition of immediate effect is. But 10 weeks after the event doesn't seem to me immediate effect. She's got to go, give Mid-Bedfordshire an MP who will actually stand up for them, fight for them, because at the moment she's absolutely absent. And I would say to Rishi Sunak, get a grip of this. This is one of your MPs. Do something about it. Force the issue and get on with it.
While I have you, Sir Keir, I know that you've vowed to force the government to bring in a new law to make offenders appear in court. My listeners, like most of the country, of course, are horrified by the Lucy Letby case. I was reading a very informed piece by the secret barrister yesterday, whose work I'm sure you're familiar with, saying that we must be wary of politicians going down the something must be done route, and it's a fairly populist posture to pretend that we could sort of start bringing convicts kicking and screaming, dragging them into the dock. So what would this law look like?
Look, I think if we just think for a moment about what these families have been through, I've got kids, and many people listening will have kids. I can't even imagine the ordeal that they've been through, and to be denied the sort of defendant actually facing justice at the final stage of sentencing hurts them deeply. And therefore I don't think it's enough for politicians or lawyers to simply say, I'm sorry, nothing can be done. When I was Director of Public Prosecutions, I met no end of people who told me when we had a problem, trying to improve victims' rights, nothing can be done, don't change it, Keir, it's been in place a long time. Nearly every one of those cases, we change things for the better. Here, I'm not going to pretend it's easy, James. I'm not going to pretend there's an easy answer. But there are answers, there's options. We said to the government back in April of last year, change the law, bring forward a proposal to ensure that defendants do face justice. We will look at the proposals and we'll support them. So the government, there's no block here for the government. And I think for the government or anybody to simply say, it's in the too difficult box, is, in the face of the grief of those families and other families, because this isn't the first case. We've had this conversation now for over a year. This is at least, we've had, I think, 2 or 3 sets of conversations about this. So I say to the government, if you won't do it, we'll try and force it. But actually, I'd actually say more openly to the government, if you bring forward a proposal to change the law on this, it will have Labour support and we could do this very quickly. Stop talking and start doing.
Why has it become a thing, actually, with your DPP hat on? Why hasn't it been a conversation for years?
Well, I think it's just there's been higher profile cases more recently. I also think that, for many years, the criminal justice system was seen as a sort of straight fight between the prosecutor and the defence, with the victims having a sort of walk-on part. I felt that was wrong, and over the years what we've been trying to do is to make sure that victims and their families have a proper role. So this is evolving, but this one needs fixing, and very hard to explain why the government's dragging its feet. It's almost as if it's the same as, the economy, the housing, you name it. They've sort of run out of road, run out of energy, and don't have the wherewithal to govern anymore.
And finally, I promise, the Eton College has teamed up with Star Academies to create 3 new colleges in Dudley, Middlesbrough and Oldham, offering transformative outcomes for young people in disadvantaged areas. Is that the sort of thing you could get behind?
Well, look, I've no problem at all with private schools giving whatever support they can to communities. But I think fundamentally, you can't have an education strategy that's built on that. You have to have something that gets to grips with the real problems. In state secondary schools, we've got many children not being taught in maths and physics by teachers who actually teach maths and physics. So what I say is let's get rid of the tax break for private schools and use that to recruit and employ the teachers in subjects where we're short of specialist teachers, so that across the whole country everybody can benefit. That's what we'd do as a Labour government. I think it's the right thing to do. So I don't stand in the way of these initiatives by Eton or anyone else, but then that's not a comprehensive strategy for improving the education of our children and young people across the United Kingdom.
Sir Keir Starmer, thank you very much.
Thank you.
It's coming up to 11:15. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Now, regular listeners to the programme will know that when we do something like that at the top of the hour, for reasons I have not yet been able to fully comprehend or work out, it changes the rhythm of what follows. So after these words, we will launch into an exciting new topic, but we will do so 15 minutes late. And it'll be interesting to see whether or not we can break that rhythm of you thinking you only start ringing in at about 20 past, when in fact that's when I'm going to be drawing breath. It's 17 minutes after 11. I'm going to change direction now, actually, because something that Keir Starmer just said to me has taken root in my thinking, and it was the comments about 2 young women who postponed their decision to go to university, according to the Labour leader, because of the cost of living crisis. When you interview politicians, and I don't really do it very often, but you find yourself almost reflexively pushing back against claims that they make. I don't know whether this is healthy or not, and sometimes I prefer the interviewers who tend not to do it. But what I mean by that is a sort of scepticism. Jeremy Paxman put it best, although I can't fully repeat the words that he deployed when describing this approach, which is he went into every interview thinking, why is this lying bar steward lying to me? I don't think he was lying about that. I mean, it'd be pretty weird if he was, because there will be people who've had a look at the state of the nation, have had a look at their own finances, have had a look at the cost of living. I'm looking at rent. I'll give you a statistic on rent in a moment that will make your hair curl. And decided that they would take a year off not to travel to Goa, but to get some money in the bank before going off to university, which, as Keir Starmer told us, he did himself, even when the economy was in slightly, or at least the experience of a student would have been considerably easier in financial terms. And the reason why that's taken root in my thoughts is because I don't think we've done that. We've done what I would describe as hard consequences of the cost of living crisis. We've spoken to people who were truly on their uppers. We have covered food banks and even warm banks. I remember being absolutely gobsmacked. I don't know if you were listening that day when we heard the first talk, before it made the news, before it was getting picked up in newspapers. We heard the first reports of a charity or a community or a company, a council, I think, opening a warm bank, somewhere people could go during the cold snap, during the depths of winter, to simply be warm for a bit, because the cost of putting on their heating at home was prohibitive. And we found people enduring all sorts of privations, didn't we? Only sitting in one room, sleeping in it, and in front of the telly, covered in blankets, and staying there rather than going upstairs to a freezing cold. All sorts of stories. The one, oddly, that stuck with me was the notion of an indoor coat. I don't know if you remember that. I do. I remember all the details, actually, which isn't always the case with memorable callers. It was a teacher's wife in Cromer in East Anglia who talked about indoor coats and outdoor coats. So it was so cold in the house that the kids wore coats. But that meant, of course, that they weren't going to feel any benefit when they went outside. So they had an indoor coat and an outdoor coat, or another coat that they put on over their indoor coat when they went out of their house to protect them from the outdoor cold, which was even greater than the indoor cold. 20 minutes after 11. That's what I mean by hard consequences. The statistic on renters is that 51% of renters now, 51% of people renting in the private rental market consider themselves to be one paycheck away from eviction, one paycheck away from not being able to pay their rent. Now that's a reflection on savings, which is fascinating, because it means that that's 51% who aren't saving anything, but saving enough to get a deposit on your own place, that's going to be a multiple. It's going to be a much, much higher figure. So that's the reality of the hard consequences of the cost of living crisis. Not being able to put your heating on, not being able to feed your kids, having indoor coats and outdoor coats. What I'd really like to do, and I am completely in your hands now, I'm entirely reliant on you on this one. I'd like to know about the softer consequences in the way that those two young women in Worthing have postponed university. And you know what happens when you postpone something? If you're anything like me, the more you postpone it, the less likely it becomes that you'll ever do it. So, you may have decided not to go to university. You may have decided not to get married. I just want to have a look, a warm, friendly look at cost of living consequences that are not what you might describe as earth-shattering, that are not heartbreaking, that are not government shaming. We've done lots of that, and we'll do it again. I'm not in any way taking my eye off the ball, but I think today I'd be really interested in that. The softer consequences, the decisions that you've taken, the things you've pressed pause on, the way the cost of living crisis, let's not even say crisis, let's just say cost of living. The way that the cost of living means that in August of 2023, you're not doing things, or you haven't done things that you really expected to be doing or to have done. You were supposed to be married by now. You were supposed to have a baby. You were supposed to be at university. Your children were supposed to be at university. You were supposed to have moved out of home. You were supposed to be living on your own. There was all sorts of things that I can think of. I don't want to go too soft. Don't tell me about your cancelled holiday. Well, is a cancelled holiday interesting? I don't think a cancelled holiday is interesting, but I don't want to put you off. I've already said that it's strangely difficult to start a phone in when you don't start it at the top of the hour. I don't want to make it even harder for myself by now banning people from ringing in advance, because I don't think their stories are interesting enough. But the thing you're not doing, the thing you've postponed, the thing you've pressed pause on, in the way that Keir Starmer tells us about two young women who have postponed going to university, what is it So you're never going to ring in on a day when I'm talking about not being able to turn the heating on or not being able to feed the children. But you do actually feel the consequences of the cost of living in ways that don't get reported and that don't get talked about in the House of Commons and that don't get picked up across the worlds of media or politics. If you hit that number now, you will get through. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. I suppose you could be living on a building site, couldn't you? You just can't. We moved house just before the cost of living crisis kicked in. And now, because the mortgage is much more than we were expecting and the energy bills are much more than we were expecting, we can't do it up at anything like the speed we were hoping to do it up. You're sort of sitting in a half-finished house when actually, if it wasn't for the cost of living, the house would be finished now. I'm going to invite you to ring in now on that, okay? And I can guarantee that you will get through. 0345 6060 973. Andrew hasn't swapped his car. He says, I know it sounds silly in the circumstances that some people are facing. That's what I want to cut through. It doesn't sound silly. It sounds less severe and less serious than what other people are facing, but you know, we tried to make radio for everybody. Postponing university is a big deal. It's potentially life-changing. Not swapping a car could be. And it means a greater risk of repair bills, which I can't really afford. And that makes the process even more drawn out. So these low consequence, or if you like, low-impact consequences of the cost of living that aren't getting picked up on and aren't getting reported and aren't being talked about, but that are actually really important to you. That's the call I'm looking for, all right? So now is your moment. 0345 6060 973. I will address constructive criticism. I always try to. I didn't ask him about Brexit, despite the fact that it's obviously a massive contributor to the economic downturn that he describes and low growth, because I've asked him on 3 separate occasions. I know what his answer is, and I'll probably ask him next time. But you have a limited amount of time on days like this. I was interested in the Lucy Letby angle, the conversation about forcing convicted criminals into the dock when they have declined to go there of their own volition. And I was interested also in the conversation that we were scheduled to have about the university policies and about his own inability to go to university in the current economic situation. But don't think I've taken my foot off the pedal when it comes to Brexit. I've got a reputation and a brand to uphold, and indeed a nickname. James O'Brexit. Stop talks about Brexit. What I mean, do I cease to be? It's like a tree falling down in a woods when there's nowhere there to hear it. If I stop talking about Brexit, then does that mean that Brexit will never be talked about again? So give me a break on that one, please, and focus instead, if you would, on just this thing, this notion that you're not doing something because of the cost of living. Here's another one from Eleanor. Myself and my partner got married in March 2023. We saved and had a small wedding, but we can't start a family because of the cost of living. We're having to think again about this. We've got good wages, but our mortgage has just gone up by £400. I think these are big deals. I think these are significant moments in your life, but they're not newsworthy. Someone postpones going to you. It's not newsworthy, but it's interesting to me, and I hope to you. So 0345 6060 973. It's always choice, isn't it? Whenever we talk about these things, money can't buy you happiness. Money can't buy you love. Money buys you choices. Money buys you options. The doors that are in front of you when you leave school, for example, multiply according to how financially secure your parents are. Can you afford to work unpaid, to do an internship? Can you afford to live in London, where the industry you want to get into is based, if you're not already on the ladder? Can you afford to take time off from your paid income to go and do tryouts or shifts in your dream job? Choices, choices, choices. Do you know people? So choices. As the cost of living kicks in, doors disappear. Life doors disappear, whether it is having children, whether it is going to university, whether it is getting married. These doors disappear, hopefully temporarily. And that would involve, they get locked. What doors have been closed to you personally, as a very personal inquiry, what doors have been closed to you as a consequence of the cost of living? And I'll say crisis, but it is just the cost of living. What doors have been closed to you? Another one, we spent so much of the last 10 years saving to buy a house and get married. Everyone's apologising for their privilege, which is healthy, but you really don't have to. We've left it too late to start a family, James. We're going to the Czech Republic next week for fertility treatment. I genuinely blame the Tories and anyone who voted for them for jeopardising our chances to start a family. Matt, I feel your pain. We had fertility treatment. Thankfully it worked, so I know exactly what you're going through. And I wish you all the best. I've got everything crossed. But this is the point. These are really, really big deals. Here's another one. We're moving house because we couldn't afford to do the work needed on our current house. We've been lucky enough to find something for less than our current home has sold for, but we've also had to downsize slightly. That's from Jordan in Essex. These are not newsworthy stories, but they're the most important things happening in your life. And that's why I want to talk about them. It's coming up to 11:30. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. The number you need is 0345 6060 973. And Thomas Watts is here now with your headlines. 32 minutes after 11 is the time, pretty much echoing your example, James. My wife and I moved house 3 years ago. Housework is in progress, but with the mortgage and costs doubling from £2,000 to £4,000, plus building costs rising exponentially, it's meant we're delaying starting a family as we don't want to raise a child on a building site. And even if we're lucky enough to have a child, it'll just add a few more zeros onto our household bills. You're looking at childcare. I love the way that everyone's apologising for complaining, or because you're conscious of the fact that we talk about food banks and warm banks. But this is a conversation about the softer consequences of the cost of living. People who are not necessarily who are not going hungry, but who are somewhere quite different from where they thought they would be in August 2023. At 33 minutes after 11 is the time. Helen is in Stoke-on-Trent. Helen, what would you like to say?
Hi, yeah, like I've just been telling your producer, we currently are on our 14th rise of our mortgage, which has now added nearly £200 to our mortgage.
Wow.
We are we're sending
14th since when, Helen? Sorry.
As soon as the interest rate started to rise,
wow.
That's when our mortgages, but we cannot get a fixed rate mortgage.
Oof.
Because, I don't know why.
Yeah.
I genuinely don't know why. We've tried. We are sending our son to university. We aren't sending our son. He's had to get all the loans that are out there.
Yes.
We currently can't afford even to send him with a care package. Or we were going to do a thing of pot noodles, non-perishable foods. We're currently having to ask family members to maybe chip in and do like a going away present to make it look that we've got no money.
Right.
We've got no wiggle room. Our son goes to a specialist provision college.
Right.
We weren't aware that when specialist provision college became a thing, you had to pay for your own transport.
Okay.
So which has added another £1,300 to our outgoings a year.
Do you calculate stuff annually? Is that? I mean,
because we didn't know it was a thing because he got free transport to his high school.
But I'm thinking that's like a boiler breaking, isn't it? That's on your annual outgoings. That's an unforeseen chunk.
We both work 11-hour days.
Right.
We cannot physically work anymore. There's no more money coming in. There's more going out than we've got coming in, and I don't know at what point it's going to break. We cannot physically afford. We've had 6 weeks off and we haven't left the house.
Right.
Because I cannot afford a day out with the boys.
Good Lord.
Well, we haven't, left the house. We've been sort of to the park and we've been
of course, I understand.
For a walk around the local area, but as it stands...
Nothing that involves spending money, really.
Nothing that involves spending any money. We can't even afford, we're at a point where we can't even afford to put petrol in the car to drive them to Blackpool to sit on a beach and have a bag of chips. We can't. There is literally no wiggle room.
That's brutal.
So whilst, yes, we're earning money to be able to live, because that's all what we're doing at the moment.
Well, you're existing, aren't you? You're just existing.
Yeah.
Well,
we get up, we go to work, we come home, we eat, and we go to bed. That's literally it. That's all we do.
Listen, you know this already, but when interest rates do start coming down, things improve for you immediately. That's the one tiny, scant, paper-thin silver lining to the cloud of the type of mortgage that you've got. But I hope you...
The problem is, in that respect, it doesn't, because we've actually got 2 children with the severe autism and epilepsy. So when the interest rates start to come down,
yeah,
the youngest will be starting college
Right.
Which means we'll have a £2,600 outgoing.
Oh, my days.
For their transport.
Gosh.
So, and I don't think parents of SEN children are aware of that, because I wasn't.
No.
And my children have been diagnosed since they were 4 and 5, and I wasn't aware of that.
That's a massive hit, and it might be one of those things that varies from council to council, of course, as well. It probably is.
And I think it's also the problem we've got as well is also we are in a different county to where they go to college.
Yes. Have you told them the problems you've got?
There's no college suitable.
There's not. Oh, no. I see. Okay.
No, there's no college.
Yeah.
Well, there's no college in our area. They have to go to that college. It's the only one in the area.
No, I understand. I do. So, I mean, I'd usually would ask what the light at the end of the tunnel looks like, but that wouldn't be a very helpful question in this context, would it, Helen?
No. No, because we can't get. I know people say, "Oh, we'll find a better paid job."
Mm.
My children,
to be fair, that's only tabloid
but,
columnists and Tory MPs say that. I don't think anybody in the sort of real world says that. But you've got, and again, the specifics of your circumstances make it almost impenetrable, because, as you say, even when interest rates start coming down, you're going to have to find extra money for your children's transport costs, which is, I would say, an essential, not a luxury, although no doubt there'll be someone popping up like 30p Leenock to claim that they could get to school on a penny farthing like he did back in the day. But it is, as you say, completely unhelpful, and it's happening everywhere. And that's mortgage holders. It's happening everywhere. It's happening in every corner of the country, either on a big scale. And Helen's example, I don't think gets described as soft consequences, really, which is what we were examining. That's pretty hard consequences. But where does it end? I love this. It's one of my favourite things. Emma in Glasgow points it out. A few people have the theory of Sam Vines's boots. In Terry Pratchett, the reason why the rich were so rich was because they managed to spend less money. Boots, for example. A man who could afford $50 had a pair of boots that would still be keeping his feet dry in 10 years' time, while a poor man who could only afford cheap boots would have spent $100 on boots in the same time and would still have wet feet. Right now, so many of us are lucky to have boots, but we definitely have wet feet. I think we can say with some confidence that the ludicrous Daily Mail columnist Richard Littlejohn has not read that particular Terry Pratchett story, because he literally boasts in the column today about how he always buys really expensive shoes and they've lasted him forever. And, of course, tomorrow we'll be back to lambasting people who are struggling. John's in Feltham. John, what made you pick up the phone?
I was driving down the road and was listening to you, and basically, I can't afford to retire because of the cost of living.
Oh, Lord. And you want to be clear?
I would very much like to. I've spent all my life since age 17 working. I didn't have the opportunity to go to university and get a decent job. Oh. So I joined the army instead. Must admit, I had a good career there and just sort of bimbled around doing other stuff like bus driving and other stuff afterwards.
When did you expect to be knocking it on the head? If I'd asked you 10 years ago, how old are you now, John?
67 now.
So if I'd asked you when you were 57, when do you think you'll be retiring, what would you have said?
I would have said hopefully around about 60 to 62.
Gosh. Well, this is before the cost of living kicked in.
Yeah.
So what happened? Is just the pensions you've got aren't going anywhere near as far as you thought they would?
Basically, yeah.
Including the military one?
The military one is reasonable, but because I joined before there was such things as military pension, that bit of my service got knocked off.
Oh, typical. I mean, I know you're not a laboratory experiment, but I mean, are you ever going to be able to retire?
That is a good question. If things start coming down, then hopefully by the time I'm 70, I will.
Okay, so it's a question of how far what's coming in will go, isn't it?
Yeah. Basically.
And at the moment, everything is so expensive that it is actually it's beyond reach. It must be deeply frustrating.
It's very frustrating. I mean, basically, my state pension does not even cover my rent.
So you can't not work then, really?
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, I hope things do get better sooner rather than later for you and for Helen and for everybody. But this isn't. It's not supposed to be like this, is it, John? That's the point, I think, that this conversation's driving at. We know the fundamental horror of a food bank or a warm bank or an eviction, but the but the fingertips with which people are holding on to a normal existence kind of overlook the fact that people who want to retire literally can't retire, whereas at previous points in history you would have done by now.
Yes.
I wish you well, mate. I really do. And 11:41 is the time. The question's pretty straightforward, but the answers are as diverse as they are upsetting, aren't they? Richard, very much on the theme of apologising but I am looking for the less upsetting stories as well as the tricky ones. It says, due to the increasing costs of everything, I've given up my cleaner and my dog walker. This will free up a few hundred a month for me. But of course, it means that I'm taking away from them. It's an awful situation, but these luxuries have now got to stop for me. A brilliant point, because that's why it's relevant and interesting. Oh, well, world's tiniest violin, he's got to walk his own dog now. But the dog walker will be relying on that income. The cleaner will be relying on that income, and that goes. So that's the knock-on effect. That's the domino. Dave's in Farnham Common. Dave, what would you like to say?
Good morning, James.
Hello.
Mine's a good news and bad news story, unusually.
Go on.
Unlike John, I never wanted to retire. I love my job. I'm a professional photographer, and I'll be happy to do that until I drop. But my story is I was sold on the get a mortgage and eventually own your own house and pass it on to your kids idea. I've paid a mortgage 50 years, and my daughter, who's renting in the West Country, fell foul of the latest trend of landlords to sell up.
Right.
And I've changed my mortgage to a lifetime mortgage, so I now lose all the equity that I was hoping to pass on. But it has enabled me to help her buy the house that she was renting. So there's good news in it.
It's true. So essentially you've given her inheritance early.
Exactly.
But you now have to find the money. Is it equity release, or do you have to pay every month?
It's equity release.
Oh, fair enough. I mean, people.
So it's taken away the need for me to hit my mortgage target every month.
Yeah.
Which, fortunately, we did this just before the interest rate started shooting up. So she's got a fixed rate for a few years, but she's got to work like a dog
forever
to cover her.
It's a weird one, isn't it? It's a weird one, Dave. 50 years, paid off your mortgage. You didn't think you'd be ringing into a radio show about the cost of living hitting people in unexpected places.
Exactly. But unlike John, I just pray. I don't expect to retire or want to. I just hope that my business carries on enough for me to limp by. I'm very grateful for my pension, and I do get a bit frustrated when people say that the youngsters of today are paying the pension of the old people like me. I'm 76.
Yeah.
But of course, the government, when they were receiving the payments,
do people say that
from working people, they should have invested it and allowed it to grow instead of spending it at the time.
Well, I mean, do people say that young people are paying the pensions of the older people? Because they're paying their own pensions at some unspecified point in the future.
No, I've heard it on TV chat shows quite a lot.
Well, you want to stay away from those sort of things, Dave.
Absolutely.
You want to stay? So stick with us, or at least stick with me. It's 11:45. 11:49 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I nearly said something silly then. I nearly said, I don't think politicians are aware of this. But of course, we're talking about something that was brought to my attention by a politician, in this case, Keir Starmer, the leader of the opposition. Talking about two young women he met this morning in Worthing who have postponed going to university. I think this is absolutely fascinating. I personally, as a radio presenter, I haven't quite nailed this as a question. I haven't quite got in there. I'll give you an example. Laura's texted to say, I hope this doesn't sound silly. On the very rare occasion that we can go out for a meal, the kids know that they can only have one drink and one course. It takes some of the joy out of going out. Now, I completely get that, but of course, we've already spoken to people who can't retire and who can't really afford to keep the ship afloat at the moment. And that is why people will apologise or not fully engage in the conversation about the softer consequences, because we're completely conscious of how Other people are suffering much more. Phil brings a beautiful angle to it. He goes, I'll tell you a positive for me personally, James. Because of cost of living, I have become more compassionate and understanding. Our mortgage goes up next year. We will really start to feel the pinch, but I just keep thinking about how the hell less well-off people are managing. I think it's changed me for the better. And listening earlier, I forget who we were talking to. Was it possibly Tim, was it, in Cornwall, wondering why we don't go out onto the streets and protest more like the French do, particularly about income inequality in this case and wealth distribution. I think I know the answer. And it popped up, because I don't know if you've noticed, 2 calls I've pushed back at by saying, do people really say that? And of course they do. And that is how you create an environment in which people don't object as robustly as perhaps they should, because we have been, whether we've fallen for it or not, we've been weaned on a diet of bogus personal responsibility. How many times have you heard right-wing commentators or right-wing politicians say, well, you need to get a better job, or you need to get on your bike, or you need to go somewhere else? So what they've done is they have created an illusion of responsibility for difficulty, so that anybody who is in difficulty must be there through their own fault, fecklessness, or failings. And now we're living in a country where almost everybody is dealing with difficulties, whether it's Dave having to release the equity on his house, or John at 67 not being able to retire, or Helen not being able to afford to get her kids to the special needs school they need to attend. All of these things are bona fide difficulties, undeserved and unwarranted, inflicted upon us by the economic situation in a country where we've been told for 50 years that if things are going badly, it's because you're a lazy so-and-so, and you've probably got a flat-screen television, and I bet you spend all your money on fags and booze. And I know a bloke who knows a bloke who knows a bloke who goes to Ibiza for 3 months every summer while simultaneously claiming universal credit. Do you know, before I started in this job, that was pretty much all that happened on speech radio in the United Kingdom. If it wasn't on the BBC, it was some bloke sitting behind this microphone trying to turn everybody against everybody, trying to blame the unemployed for being unemployed, trying to blame the people who were struggling to make ends meet for struggling to make ends meet, blaming this for that and that for the other. And then, of course, it all turned into blaming immigrants for everything. And it's not landing, is it? The small boat stuff has sunk without trace. And yet we're still here, with pretty much every household in the country facing difficulties, some of which are relatively trivial. But you can only respond to the world in which you live. I think this is one of the most important conversations that we've had in recent months. Politically, it's absolutely fascinating. But I haven't quite nailed it yet as a question, as a phone-in, because I can't make the phones ring off the hook if everybody feels a little bit guilty about describing the thing that they're describing. And I'm going to work on that, and we'll come back to it. But they're ringing enough. Lee's in Leamington Spa. Lee, what would you like to say?
Morning, James.
Hello.
I'm looking forward to seeing you in Northampton.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Thank you. Let me just check let me check the date on that, Lee, for other listeners. I am in Northampton on the 5th of November.
Oh, it's November, that's it. So if I march towards you with a Sharpie, you'll forgive me.
No, that's absolutely fine. The signings are the best bit. Well, obviously, being on stage is pretty lovely, but the signings are one of the best bits about writing a book, I've got to tell you. It's a lot better. The best bit, all the best bits about writing a book are the bits that don't involve writing a book. Every time. And anyway, sorry, we digress. What do you want to say?
Yeah, no, I'm going to also be one of those people who's going to apologise for possibly the triviality of my issue, but it's not really my concern. It's more for my children.
Yeah.
So my children go to school, and if you factor in rush hour traffic, it's about an hour to get from where we live to their school.
Cool.
So that's a couple of hours in the car each way for them every day. And we had plans to up sticks and move closer to the school for obvious reasons.
Yes.
And also all their friends live there. And so even just socialising with them outside of school time is a bit of a mission.
Yeah.
Because of the distance. And with everything that's going on at the moment, our plans to up sticks and move have basically just been destroyed.
That's a big deal, Lee. It's a huge deal. I mean, the context of your family, illness and famine excluded, these are the big issues. These, being near to school, being near to friends, being able to do things that you couldn't previously do. These are the things. This is the journey that families go on. And you're caught in a traffic jam, aren't you? An economic traffic jam.
Well, and literally as well, getting stuck in the traffic on the way there each morning. But and you get squeezed at both ends because obviously the house prices are going up where we're trying to move to, but our fixed-term mortgage has just expired, and I've just gone onto a new deal. So obviously our costs at this end have gone up.
What was the increase, if you don't mind me asking, roughly?
It was only I say only. It was about 300.
Okay, adds up.
Which I know I've heard many calls where it's a lot worse than that. So I do thank my lucky stars for that. But when you factor it in at both ends, and the fact it's a new fixed-term mortgage, I think we're stuck here for another. I think it's another 5 years.
Yeah.
And that's 5 more years of them being stuck in the car, and it's just a knock-on effect.
No, it is. It's exactly what I was talking about, and I'm grateful to you for sharing and indeed for understanding what I'm driving at. This sense of, look, we're not sinking, but goodness me, we're not going in the direction we thought we would be going, or at the speed we thought we would be going. And for us in our world, that's a pain. It's not the same, it's not comparable, but it matters. It matters enormously. And I think the political significance of it may be eluding both parties, even though Keir Starmer turned me onto this subject in the first place. Lee, thank you, mate. I'll see you in Northampton, November the 5th. What's the place called? I checked I've forgotten the name. Something and Dern, I think. I don't know Northampton at all. I mean, literally don't know Northampton at all. I'm really looking forward to that. 11:56 is the time. I won't call James, says Sam, as I'd get too upset or swear. I'm a single parent. I have a really good job. My son's got into the university of his choice. Before all this, I would, without an issue, pay the £400 a month difference between his accommodation payments and what he's got. But with the rising cost of living, I don't know how I'm going to manage. My mortgage has gone up £400 a month. Utilities have gone up another 150. Petrol, food, up. It's all right for the Tories to say we're all in this together. They are lying toads. We really aren't. I worry about everything now. And an awful lot of people are in that category. And then little things, like Rob points out, my parents are pensioners who love going to the matinees at their local theatre. They used to go a few times a year and then the panto with their youngest granddaughter. Now they can only afford the panto. It's taken away a lot of their joy in their old age. Alan's in Wolverhampton. Alan, what would you like to say?
Before your last caller, you kind of hit the nail on the head.
First time for everything, Alan. First time for everything.
I've kind of been thinking, is the situation that I'm in my fault because of the choices that I've made?
No.
I think but that's what the government want us to think. Yes. And I'm just in absolute despair on the outlook of what me and my partner are going to do, because we both work full time.
Yeah.
Granted, we're not well paid. We're both minimum wage, but we put the hours in and we work full time.
Yeah.
We've got a 2-year-old son. He goes to nursery 4 days a week, which allows my partner to go and work.
Right.
And when we're going through our budget and what we've got left at the end of the month,
yeah.
I think the rent and the childcare account for just over 50% of our combined income. So that wipes out one of our wages just on those two bills.
Yeah.
I think at the end of the month, we're left with 3% as disposable income. And I can't believe that that's purely based on the decisions that me and my partner have made in our lives to lead us up to this point.
No. I mean, you've got a little bit of, well, unless you have another baby, of course. The childcare costs cease to matter when the baby starts primary school, or at least they come down enormously, don't they? But that, out of all the things that they could do, that they could politically address, I've been sitting behind this microphone for years saying, why don't they do that? Why don't they extend somehow to preschool care the same provision or the same social support that you have for school care? What do you think the light at the end of the tunnel looks like? What do you... Actually, no, don't go there. Come back a minute, actually. Where does that idea come from that it must have been your fault? Now that you've heard me pick it apart with, I hope, some success, who put you in that place where you were kicking yourself for the situation that you find yourself in, do you think?
I guess what it boils down to is the lack of, like what you just said, that when you haven't got that financial backing behind you, that you don't have many options, you don't have many doors. And when you don't have many doors like that, I can't speak for everyone, but my automatic response is, is the lack of those options because of something that I'm doing or something that I'm not doing? Do I need to do something to make these doors appear, or am I blind to these options, or that I can't see them? Am I not creative enough to see the options? And I just think to myself, when I really boil down to it, no, it's not. It's because of the situation that quite a lot of people are in the country, and we're all broke.
And all playing by the rules. So that's the bit that makes me very cross, actually.
Yes, I mean, we're doing exactly what the Conservative government wants us to do. We're both in work full time. We yes, we get 10 hours a week of free childcare, but these are 3 days, we have to pay for. And because our combined incomes are above the threshold, we're not entitled to any government support at all for childcare fees, for universal credit. I mean, we get the child benefit, but that's universal. Everybody gets that. And I just think, what are the options? I'm 34, so like going to university, I can't afford to go to university, because if I did, I wouldn't have the time.
You've got a family to support in the meantime.
What are my options to better my situation?
That's the great betrayal.
And I don't know what that is.
That's the great Conservative betrayal. You've just absolutely nailed it. I've done my bit. And all right, you teach that I should do more if I want to improve my lot. How can I?
Yeah. If they're saying, I'm all for it, if the government are saying, you can help yourself, tell me how, and I will happily do that.
There it is. And you've got 30p Lee popping up giving diet advice or telling people to get on their bikes. It beggars belief, doesn't it, actually, when you put it like that, in really stark personal terms. It beggars, but because they've got nothing else, Alan. It worked in the 80s, it worked in the 90s, but it just doesn't. Maybe this is what it sounds like to be living in a declining economy, to be living in a declining country.
Yeah. I mean, I've voted Conservative for a long time, and I'm kind of regretting those decisions. And I can honestly say I can't wait for a Labour government. But then the other half of me thinks, well, okay, when Labour get in, and it's a when, not an if. They're going to have such a battle to fix things. It's still not. It's not going to be fixed for a long time.
That is the one area where you give him a bit of credit for changing his mind rather than calling him a flip-flop, because he says, no, look, in 2020 I could promise to abolish tuition fees. 2023 is a very, very, very different world. I think there is a consciousness of that on his part, but as you say, this is some mountain that they're going to have to start, or it's an oil tanker, a mother of all oil tankers that they're going to have to turn around. Thank you, Alan, and take care, mate. You're doing the right thing, and that used to sound encouraging and comforting, but I just listening to you, I'm not sure it does anymore. It's 12:03. Is it Occam's razor? Is it the simplest answer is usually the right one? I think it is, because I'm just wondering actually whether the conversation we're about to have contains the answer to the question I'm about to ask was contained within the last hour. I really do. I wonder where you have to be. Do you remember on Blue Peter when they're doing the charities and they'd have that thermometer filling up? Do you remember that? You'd see the sort of fund filling up. I don't know why I've used Blue Peter. That ages me terribly. But I wonder what the threshold, I've used that word a lot today, the threshold is for being susceptible to anti-refugee rhetoric in the context of your own problems. I wonder if there is a logical relationship between it. I've always been of the view that it's politically toxic and genius at the same time to blame the other for your own life. If I can persuade you that it is the fault of Mexicans that you can't afford to retire, or if I can persuade you that it is the fault of refugees that you can't afford to retire, if I can persuade you that it is the fault of people who came here in the 50s as part of the Windrush generation, that they're the reason why you can't afford to move house or can't afford to get your kids to school. That is just, if you're in power, that's just genius, right? I mean, it's such a massive get out of jail free card. And what does right-wing media do, if not support right-wing government? I don't think we've ever seen it quite as plainly and quite as cynically as we have in the last few years. But the way in which client media has given a free pass to everything from the calamity of Liz Truss to the moral depravity of Boris Johnson and the rank awfulness of Rishi Sunak, it's actually breathtaking. Rishi Sunak's been in charge for long enough now to have made a difference to something somewhere, and yet that last hour was jam-packed by the end with people whose lives have been put into reverse, or at the very least have been put on pause by a cost of living crisis about which government could clearly do more. They're still clamouring for tax cuts, which obviously will help people who are more comfortable than others. The idea that public sector spending is something that can be shaved more is, I mean, it's absolutely breathtaking, but it's ideologically sound. So why am I linking these two stories together? Because I am genuinely interested in why you think Rishi Sunak made this promise about small boats when, as far as I could tell, and speaking to people who know of what they speak, it was obvious to everybody that it wasn't going to work. So why did he do it? I think the first way into that question will be to say because it could have worked, perhaps, and he just didn't understand the issue. Perhaps Rishi Sunak and other members of the cabinet have believed the right-wing bile punted by their own client media. So if these people coming here in small boats really were all sort of lead-swinging, passport-burning charlatans who are coming here because the idea of getting £9 a week is so attractive they're prepared to risk their lives for it, then maybe it would have worked. Maybe the idea of being banged up straight away the minute you get onto the beach would have worked. But if you're a genuine refugee, then obviously it's irrelevant. All that the place you're running towards has to be is safer than the place you're running away from. And of course, maybe they've fallen for that. Why can't they all stay in France, which is a position of such epic ignorance? The idea that every Ukrainian refugee should have stayed in Poland because it's the first country they'd enter into. I wonder whether we've seen with Suella Braverman, and to a lesser extent with Rishi Sunak, but only lesser because he's not front and centre on the issue. I wonder whether we've seen what happens when conservative politicians start believing the lies of their own client media. God, that would be fascinating, wouldn't it? I literally pressed send on the book last night, so I can't add. Every time I have an interesting thought, there's a little voice in the back of my head saying, you must get that in the book. But I think it's too late now. I might have time to revise the Liz Truss chapter. Would you like to know about the Liz Truss chapter in the new book? It's very short. It's about 10,000 words per chapter. I get to Liz Truss, I think it's going to be a page and a half. The point I'm making, though, is trying to get your head around the Rishi Sunak attitude to small boats. There are two answers at the moment to the question of why did he do it? Why did he do it? The first answer is because he needs to distract you from what we've been talking about all morning. But it only works in the short term if he knows it's not going to work. Why did he make this pledge? Answer, because he's really hoping to replace EU or immigration with small boats. He needs that whipping boy. He needs that receptacle of vitriol into which the great British public will pour all of their unhappiness and all of their disappointment and all of their grievance, and they will blame it on people in small boats instead of blaming it on people in charge. I mean, really, when you think about it, it's amazing that we've fallen for it for so long. Who are you going to blame? The people in charge or the people in small boats? I'm going to blame the people in small boats, James. I work for GBBs. I mean, it's actually breathtaking. Oh, the Tories are great. Bring back Boris. Oh, I love them all. They're fantastic. That Nadine Dorries, she's wonderful. Jacob Rees-Mogg, that's the kind of man that should be running the country. So who are you going to blame for the fact that your own life is not going where you wanted it to? Well, I'm going to blame people in small boats, James. Is that why he did it? Is that, I mean, you're allowed to answer yes to this question. Is that the only reason why he did it? 0345 6060 973. Or is there another one? 0345 6060 973. I don't know. I've got some interesting clips to play you. One is from I think it's from a couple of months ago. I mean, every time he spoke for a bit, he was like one of those dolls with the string in the back who's just say the same thing. You remember those? What did they used to say? I need my nappy changing. I need my nappy changing. I need my nappy changing. I will stop the boats. I will halve inflation. I will lower interest or whatever. I want my nappy changed. That's what he was like for a long, long time. But here he is, I think a couple of months ago.
My message is this. Our plan is starting to work.
Will it be done by the next election?
So I want it to be done as soon as possible, but I also want to be honest with people that it is a complex problem. There's not one simple solution and it can't be solved overnight, and I wouldn't be being straight with people if I said that was possible.
But you did say that was possible, and you did say that would be done by the next election, and everybody told you that it wouldn't. Two stories here, because the other one you're probably not going to see very widely reported. My old mate Mark Townsend had this story in The Observer on Sunday. Now listen, if you are of the gammon and pineapple persuasion, then I appreciate you listening. I also appreciate it's a form of masochism. But I want you to ask yourself why the people that you think are telling you the truth and that small boats really are to blame for the fact that your own life isn't going in quite the direction that you hoped. I want you to just wonder for a moment why they're not telling you about this story. The Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, has refused to endorse the scheme that helps asylum seekers in the UK. All right, fair enough. I don't want them to be helped. The UN hailed a pilot project that cut the cost of helping refugees, but the Home Office remains set on a hardline illegal immigration bill. The UN has backed a Home Office-funded pilot that would dramatically reduce the spiralling costs of the crisis-hit asylum system. Yet Suella Braverman is refusing to endorse the scheme, despite it being described as more humane. So this week, the United Nations, the UNHCR, the refugee agency that helps the UK government improve its asylum system, will praise a Home Office-funded scheme in Bedfordshire, where the cost of accommodating refugees and migrants was cut by more than half when compared with placing them in detention, which is the plan that they have now. The savings came through housing people and giving legal and welfare support. Now, why would a Home Secretary refuse to endorse something that massively cuts the costs of looking after refugees? Answer: because they're pretending that they are illegal people. The rhetoric is that genuine refugees deserve to be deported. The rhetoric is that there is no such thing as a genuine refugee. In much the same way that there's no such thing as a safe and legal route into this country, so there can be no such thing as a safe and legal refugee. They must all be enemies. They must all be, well, you tell me if you've ever heard her use the word invasion. So I get that bit of it. But what did they think was going to happen? And if the Times headline today, migrants will cost billions for years, is true, why would they not be embracing a scheme that actually recognises the reality of the situation and cuts the costs? OK, you ready? 0345 6060 973. Two questions for you. Why did Rishi Sunak go in so hard on the small boats when it was almost certain that the policy would fail? Right? I want you to ring me and answer that question now. 0345 6060 973. Question number two, my answer to that question is, it's all he's got left to distract people's attention away from the fact that the people in charge are responsible for what is happening in this country. Question number two is, why hasn't it worked this time? Why is it not working this time? Why are the Tories' desperate attempts to persuade you that the reason why you're struggling to pay your mortgage or struggling to put food on the table or unable to retire or struggling to get the kids to university or struggling to buy a new car, why have the Tories' desperate attempts, straight out of the Nigel Farage thigh-rubbing playbook, why have these desperate attempts to blame these desperate people not translated into any measurable political success? Because it's always worked before in my lifetime, or at least in living memory. It's been a piece of cake. But it's not working now. Two questions. Why did he do it? 0345 6060 973. And I don't mean the failure of the policy, I mean the failure of the politics. If, as I suspect, it was clearly designed just to provide a convenient scapegoat for political incompetence and failure, why hasn't it worked this time? It's 12:17. 20 minutes after 12 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I hope I'm not sounding stupid today, but why did Rishi Sunak do it? Why did he stake so much on stopping the so-called small boats when it seemed to me, at least, highly unlikely that he would be able to? Why did he do it? 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. Sean suggests the answer is he will say that it's not his fault that they couldn't stop the boats, James. It will all be the fault of judges, lawyers, the European Court of Human Rights, Labour. So they will use this as their next election campaign, promising to clamp down on all of these things. We've already seen them suggesting that we leave the ECHR, which leads us into the second question, which is will it work? Will it work? And why isn't it working? Look, here he is two months ago, all right? Here he is 2 months ago.
Today, I'd like to update you on the progress that the Home Secretary and I are making. And my message is this. Our plan is starting to work. Before I launched my plan in December, the number entering the UK illegally in small boats had more than quadrupled in 2 years. Now, some said this problem was insoluble, or just a fact of 21st century life. They lost faith in politicians to put in the hard yards to do something about it. And of course, we still have a long way to go. But in the 5 months since I launched the plan, crossings are now down 20% compared to last year. That's right, crossings are down 20%. And in December, I reached a deal with Albania.
Well done. That was because of the weather, chiefly, as I understand it. And he must have known that. And yet he's still doubling down on it. He's still blowing up his own balloon. This desperate attempt to stake political capital on stopping them. And of course, by boasting about having succeeded, he shoots the fox, suggested by Sean in Wiltshire, of subsequently claiming we couldn't do it because of this and we couldn't do it because of that, and damn those pesky lawyers and those lefty human rights activists. You can't claim 2 months ago, in June I think, you can't claim in June that it's all working and I'm brilliant, and then claim a year later, oh, it's all failed because of things, because how come it was working back in June? Unless he then turns around and says, well, I was wrong then, or I was lying then. So why do you think he's gone in so hard on this particular policy? A lot of the rest of it is daft. Obviously, the inflation stuff, the interest rate stuff, a lot of that is gravity. And since the Bank of England went independent, it's got very little to do with government policy anyway. But on this one, on this specific thing, I don't understand why he did it, unless it really is the case that the government, the Prime Minister, the Cabinet have fallen for the kind of rhetoric that the tabloids have been punting out for years, which is a little bit weird. It means you've got the bloke in the pub shouting sort of nonsensical right-wing bile, and suddenly the government turns around and says, all right, let's try that. Let's try what John said. Let's try that thing that John said. And John in the pub's going, whoa, I'm just trying to draw attention to myself in the pub. I don't actually want this to be a government policy. But there it is. Alan's in Reigate. Alan, what's going on?
Yeah, good afternoon, James. Nice to chat to you.
We'll see, Alan. We'll see. Don't take anything for granted.
I never take anything for granted. I'm just living the dream. Sadly, I mean, I'm retired now. I'm 77. I was ex-HMRC and ex-bank. So I've watched what goes on in the world over the last 60 years since I was old enough to think. And there's no doubt whatsoever that Sunak's thinking on this is pure distraction so that they can try and convince everybody they should keep voting for them so that they get back into power.
But it's not. But now he's having to say, I can't do it. I like the distraction argument until I reminded myself of that thing 2 months ago when he said it was working. He was claiming it was working. No one's gone to Rwanda and the boats are still coming. So how does that turn into electoral success?
Well, I suppose at the end of the day, he can now turn around and say, well, all those lefty lawyers and all those lefties on the other side, they stopped everything from happening. So, look, we really need to carry on doing this.
How could it have been succeeding in June then?
Well, it wasn't, and we all know that. Unfortunately, it's a shame you have to call the unelected PM a follower on from Johnson as somebody who plays devil's advocate with the truth.
You've missed out Liz Truss. I mean, it's very easy to do, but he didn't quite follow on from Johnson. It's a very easy mistake to make.
Liz Truss and Kamikaze Kwarteng had 49 days to destroy this country, and that's what they did.
And we forget that a long part of that was a period of mourning for the Queen as well. So in terms of real days of actually being in power and having their hands on the steering wheel, it was even fewer than 49. Here's a question, Alan, briefly if you would.
Yes, of course.
What does he, in his mind, did he think he was going to succeed?
I think he thought, from what all his press people were telling him and all his right-wingers were telling him, that this was the argument that would win the game for them. And unfortunately, it hasn't. But it will at least still resonate with the guys down the pub. And I see and hear from a lot of them at times.
Yeah, well, and you think it will. It's just a matter. So if you were advising him from a position of unpleasantness, you'd say, no, hang in. I don't know what drum he's supposed to be hitting, though, now. It hasn't worked. He's going to be asked about it a lot. He's going to be pushed on it a lot, and he has to turn around and concede, if not defeat, then just the scale of the problem that he has failed to solve, and therefore probably shouldn't have made a massive promise. Scott, it's beginning to feel a bit like the Edstone, this. Why did he make this enormous promise? 0345 6060 973. Steve says he believes that the British public are stupid and gullible, James. You could claim anything and they will fall for it, which is where the belief the right-wing press have the ability to control the narrative. I don't know. Got the bread and circuses line from Dylan. The Tories have refined that to just circuses. They're keeping all the bread for themselves. But is this working? Catherine's in Haringey. Catherine, what do you think?
I think you're right. I think the plan was never designed to succeed. The point of this so-called policy, or it's not even a policy, a tactic.
Yes, tactic.
Is to keep the problem afloat, no pun intended, because it is a great distractor from the myriad problems that we visit every day.
What else would he talk about? What else would
he talk about? What else would he talk about? He'd talk about 13, nearly 14 years of, mismanagement and decay, which seems to be accelerating rather than plateauing out.
Yes.
So you have to say, don't look there, look here.
Are we overthinking that? Are we looking at a scenario in Downing Street where they are, well, we've got to do something. I mean, they're not thinking we've got to do something. We can't do nothing. We've got to do something. And somebody said, well, why don't you just nick Nigel Farage's script and start banging on about small boats all the time?
Do you think they're thinking we've got to do something about the polling problem, that we're not doing so well in the polls? Or do you think they're thinking we've got to do something about the problem, i.e. the so-called small boats?
I look at, hand on heart, I know that you weren't expecting me to answer that question, but I'm going to. Hand on heart, I think Suella Braverman is telling the truth when she talks about her dreams of deporting people to places where refugees get shot dead. I genuinely do.
Sadly, I agree with you.
Yeah.
You can see it in her eyes.
I think you can. I don't normally like analyses like that because they sound a bit lazy, but you really can see it in her eyes.
And the thing that's particularly difficult to stomach, and God knows you don't have to spend long in this area to get serious indigestion, is the endless manipulation of the kind of language around it. For example, I would love to have a discussion with one of the ministers, someone like Robert Jenrick, for example, but you're not allowed to say small boats, and you're not allowed to say these people, and you're not allowed to say illegal. And then I would listen.
You just have to say people.
The problem.
You have to say people. What then? Humans? Human beings? What word would you prefer? Refugees?
Well, you'd have to then explain, human beings would be a good place to start.
Yes.
Because they are manipulating the language and the imagery of deliberately faceless people arriving on so-called small boats. Who cares about the size of the boat? How is that? Point. My father was a refugee in just at the outbreak of the Second World War. I think he arrived in a very big boat.
Yes. That's all right. That's all right then. That's all right then, says honest Bob Jenrick. How big does the boat have to be for it to be acceptable?
I think it's more all right than you think, because I think that if someone arrives on a big boat, it signifies apparently, or that's what I fear may be happening, something about their wealth, their education.
Oh gosh. No, I think that's a valid point. I think it probably also insulates them from accusations of being bogus and fraudulent, although that didn't work for a lot of European Jews during the Second World War and before. But there would still be accusations, oddly enough, often in the Daily Mail, about them being undesirable and unwanted in this country. But I think that the small boat rhetoric has taken hold because it adds to the notion that they are all fraudulent, or that they're all risking their lives in the hope of securing universal credit or something like that, which is such a weird position to have been persuaded into, that you have to turn your attention to the people doing the persuading. Catherine, thank you. This is the crucial question, is what did Rishi Sunak think was going to happen? So Braverman, I believe, wants to create a world or a country in which there are no refugees. I genuinely think that. There's no safe and legal routes. We might occasionally, in very specific and limited circumstances, engage in a little bit of international compassion by finding homes, for example, for Ukrainians, or rather we'll allow the British public to do that. We certainly won't be doing much as a government, but I don't want any refugees coming here. But then how was that going to happen under these? What did Rishi Sunak think was going to happen? All right, hit the numbers now. You will get through. 0345 6060 973. Amelia Cox is here now with your headlines. 12:34 is the time. So, you may not like it when we talk about being able to see the evil, if you like, in Suella Braverman's eyes, but I speak as I find. I don't see it with Rishi Sunak. I hope there's not some sort of low-level misogyny going on there. But I think there is a bit of snobbery on my part, because what I'm thinking is, well, somebody as successful as him, or somebody as, successful as him, and someone as clearly as intelligent as him, must have thought this was going to... Do you see what I mean? When you're trying to work out why he did what he did with the small boats. In what circumstances could it have worked? Answer, he genuinely thinks that refugees will be put off trying to come here if we make the welcome they receive even more horrible than it already is. And you sort of think, well, they haven't been put... They're already treated like cattle. That hasn't put anybody off. Because the whole point about the refugee experience is that you endure until. You endure journeys across continents until you get to your family in Leeds or London or wherever it may be. You endure until you can start work in a country where you can speak the language. You endure until. So you don't stay in France because you don't know anyone in France and you don't speak French. Although, of course, more refugees do stay in France than manage to get to the United Kingdom. Did he believe the rhetoric of the right-wing media? I genuinely don't know, and I apologise if my fascination with this question is not something you share, because I'm giving him the benefit of the doubt, and I'm thinking he must have thought it was going to work, and I don't understand how. Jim's in Glasgow. Jim, what do you think?
Afternoon.
Hello, Jim.
Listen, he's got nothing else left to shout about. He's got nobody else left to blame. And I'll tell you this, if one of his pledges doesn't work and that's gone down to with the interest rates, you'll turn around and blame the Bank of England.
Maybe. Yeah, we probably...
No, you can't make an asylum seeker illegal. It's not. You've got a right to claim asylum. And the only way you can claim asylum in the UK is to be on the UK soil.
Yes.
Now, he's cut off all these routes. So... the other thing they'll not talk about is Brexit. And if we were still in the EU, he would be able to send people back. But because we're not in the EU, we can't send people back.
It's true. It's technically true what you say. But the Dublin Convention was a little bit more complicated than you allow. Yeah. And actually, I've seen... there's so many idiots now, Jim. I get them all confused. It's either David Frost or Nick Timothy in the Daily Telegraph. I forget which one. They're kind of interchangeable. Yes. But I've seen them arguing that, the Dublin Convention is a red herring because actually we hardly ever used it before. And you're sort of thinking, but you were in charge before.
Yes.
So you're saying, well, people like Jim in Glasgow think they're so clever pointing out the Dublin Convention, which let us send back failed asylum seekers to other European Union countries where they tried to claim asylum or there's various... but we never did that. And you sort of think, well, hang on, you're boasting about having been rubbish when you had the chance.
Yes, and when David Davis was over there doing it, when he was in charge of the Brexit negotiations, the first one, he didn't even have a pencil and a notepad.
No, I know. That picture haunts me, actually. That focus. I know. I appreciate your wry chuckle there, but the people on the other side, was it Barnier on the other side? I think it was Michel Barnier on the other side.
Barnier.
They've got a skip full of box files.
Exactly.
And David Davis is sit there, and it's a glass table. I don't know if you remember, Jim. So when he looks down, all he sees is his own daft face gurning back at him.
Well, that's a mentality. But I'm looking at the way they're dealing with things now, and all I can see is the programme used to be on called In the Thick of It.
Yes. Yeah, well, except it's not very, very funny. Listen, I get your point. They knew it was going to fail. But I don't think that I see that with Sunak. And what are the consequences of failure? Maybe they do turn us into a place where there is no such thing as a refugee. Because what you describe is true under international law. But under domestic law, you could perhaps... But then what do you do? Put them all in prison? How much does that cost? And why would Suella Braverman not endorse a United Nations scheme that has been found to halve the cost of accommodating refugees compared to placing them in detention? Because she wants to lock them up. We lock enough of them up, then they'll all stop coming. That's the plan, It has to be. Nothing else makes sense. John's in Chobham. John, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Nice to talk to you.
We'll see.
We'll see. So I think you have to try to put yourself back in the mindset of when the promises were made.
Yes.
I can't remember exactly what he said, or five promises, I don't know, but yes. I remember thinking that what he was trying to achieve was quite a low goal. because things were so bad that the number of people in the waiting list for NHS.
It was January 2023. Halve inflation, grow the economy, reduce debt, cut waiting lists, and stop boats.
And inflation, wasn't it? Inflation would be halved.
Yeah, that was the first thing I said. I said that, halve inflation. That's all right.
But that was, I remember thinking, well, that was what the analysts were expecting. So that was kind of a given.
I know.
The NHS couldn't get much worse, could it? Because it's January. You're thinking we've had the pandemic. It surely must get better.
Yeah.
So I just think he went for these promises thinking they'd be achievable. Because things were so bad, it couldn't get any worse.
Debt's going to come down. It has to. It can't carry on growing. So that hasn't happened either. And then economy growing, what does that even mean? And he could claim it's growing if it's 0.1% away from recession. But that works on the first four, is he thought they were open goals, is what you're telling me, John, really?
Yes.
But it doesn't work on the small boats, I don't think.
But maybe he just got it wrong. Some people might have told him they thought he would. Because there must have been different factors affecting it. I don't know. There's so many people coming across.
Yeah.
So he must have been confident that it would happen. Or maybe the other thing is, you're looking at Liz Truss. He can't have been anywhere near as but also he's managed to put in place, or attempted to put in place, policies that could have worked, as people have said, but they've been stopped. So that was within his control. The people coming into the boats isn't, but what he can try to do to stop them was, but he couldn't put it in place.
The failure to process all of these applications adds enormously to the suspicion that it's a deliberate crisis that they've manufactured in order to be able to promise that they'd be able to solve it. So under your analysis, just making a mistake, maybe he promised it too early. Maybe the timing is what's gone wrong here, and that really they wanted to reach critical mass in June of next year. So they could say, well, this is a problem we're going to have to sort out, and Labour certainly won't be able to do it. But by saying that they'll solve it in 2023, and then as we approach September, he's not even close to getting a grip on it. They've just messed up, haven't they? They've just, even if it's cynical and a distraction and manufactured, they've blown it. They've muffed it up.
I don't know if I think let's hope that they lose the next election. But the people that still support Tory, I know some people who there are still people there. They latch on to the small boats thing and immigration. They're not focusing on everything, and it is the key to it. I can't get in to see my doctor.
No,
because
that's not. In my experience, that's not working. I don't think people are saying I can't get to see my doctor because of all these small boats in Dover.
But just one final thing: the small boats. So there's the argument around they're in France, they're safe. Why are they getting on the boat? And I've had it. I've been sitting at the coast with someone, and they've said to me, I wouldn't get in a small boat and look across that channel if I was in France and safe.
Of course you wouldn't.
That was quite a hard... You're not in the position of the people who are doing it.
Well, that's it. I've just explained it. You endure until. So you endure the danger and you endure the horror until you get to the end of your personal rainbow. And it doesn't sound like much of a pot of gold being in Brexit Britain, but if you have family here and or you can speak English and or you've been raised in a post-colonial country where we still depict Great Britain as being the promised land and this is the place you want to come to. So you endure it until you get there. Being a refugee is a journey from A to B. Or from A to Z. And the rhetoric of saying, well, why don't they stop in M is to completely fail to understand the motivation of the people who undertake and the reason why the journey is undertaken in the first place. You set out to get somewhere. All stories are like that. All stories have beginnings and middles and ends, except this story, which I can't make head nor tail of. But I take your point, John. There's a story in the Mirror today that Alan has just drawn my attention to. Since 2011, the United Kingdom has granted asylum to 37 Rwandans. Now, this is a wonderful example of a story that won't be shared by people who thrive upon the racist rhetoric of much refugee coverage. That means, essentially, that the Home Office decision makers consider Rwanda to be an unsafe place. For these 37 people, we don't know the full details of it, but how you justify sending refugees to a country from which we have granted asylum to refugees is another suggestion that I might be overthinking it, and they are just making it up as they go along out of a combination of desperation and distraction. It's coming up to 1:45. I'll squeeze in Mel in Rochester. Mel, what do you reckon?
Hi, James.
Hello,
I kind of look at it from a different point of view, that actually them talking about the boats is probably a safer bet than talking about the other pledges, because there's so much more that can be blamed on with regards to the boats failing. So, you've got a lot more external factors, but they also link into the other pledges that they've done. If they constantly talk about the NHS, ultimately that's their failing. There isn't any other one else to blame for that. They've been in government for 15 years, and the boats failing actually does them a bit of a failure, like a favour.
Does them a favour. Do you think so I understand the plan that you're describing. Is it going to work? Is it working now?
In all honesty, with my lack of faith of the British papers and the amount of people that will read the Daily Mail and will buy into it, and knowing people will talk about refugees taking away houses when they don't even know any refugees, I think it will. I genuinely believe that this is why they've done it.
That's what they're banking on. That's what might not be happening yet, but it will. We just need to push harder, push harder, push harder. I disagree with you, and I very rarely allow myself that glimmer of hope or optimism, because as we often observe on this programme, it's not the despair that gets you, it's the hope. But you have to believe that there comes a point where these vile tactics don't work anymore. Otherwise, you might as well give up, pack up and go home and stop publishing books about it. Because you have to believe that enough people will eventually see the light and realise that problems the country is facing are not caused by refugees arriving in small boats. They are caused by charlatans, cheats and liars in Downing Street. It's 12:45. 12:49. There's a hilarious little box in the Daily Mail today. It says Nadine Dorries is away. I sort of thought, how do you read it? Oh, no, yeah, sorry. She writes a column. She has been doing that job, hasn't she? It's the job that she's paid by the public purse to do that she hasn't been doing for God knows how long. And it just reminded me that we hadn't done this yet this week. Dorries. Watch. I'm still not happy about this. I've got to be honest with you. Everyone thinks it's turned into a comedy feature because I have to talk over the top of it. But I still feel, if it was the bloody newsagents, they'd have got some production on this by now. They'd have been given a special sting or something like that. But Andrew Marr doesn't sit there providing his own voiceovers over the top of a pre-recorded gig from the last time he came up with a brilliant idea of imaginative radio production. Anyway, it is now, by my calculations, 74 days. So it's 31 days in July, plus 21 days in June between 9th of June and end of June, plus 22 days in August. That's 74 days since Nadine Dorries announced that she would be resigning as a Member of Parliament with immediate effect. Immediate effect. Nadine Dorries is still an MP. Dorries. Watch. Scott's in Clydebank. Scott, what's going on with the small boats? Don't talk to me about Nadine Dorries. Life's too short.
That could have been a whole new ball game.
Couldn't it just? Yes. Stop it. Come on, what have you got?
So I was listening earlier on, and I've thought this for a while, and I did a bit of research on it. So they actually knew this was never going to work.
Right.
Their own statistics actually tell them that it was never going to work and that it's not really the problem that they're making it out to be. So when you look through Border Force and the government website, they estimate that only 30% of people who come in illegally, as they call it, come through boats. So why are they ignoring the 70%? Why are they ignoring the majority? This 30% that come on the boats, they come there through the only route of asylum they've got. The other 70% are actually coming through false documentation.
Yeah.
So they are actually committing a crime to get into the country and paying money directly to all these criminal gangs, etc. When they come to the UK, it's harder for them to seek asylum. It's harder for them to get into the UK system because they've came in with false documentation.
Because if you come in on a plane as a tourist and you destroy your passport or chuck it away before you get to customs, then they can't put you on the plane back to the country that you came from, which would be a safe country, so to speak. But those claims are even more complicated and arguably even less clear. So the people coming in not on small boats are arguably less desperate than the people coming in on the small boat.
Exactly. They're the people who...
You're right, of course. Yes.
It's the people with the money who can afford to buy false passports to get into the UK that they're ignoring. So why are they picking on the minority who are poorer?
Because they're much more visible. They're much more visible.
Yeah. It's the same as they had a while where it was the people on the lorries, and you had the cameras, and they were filming everyone coming off of lorries for a while, and then they stopped doing that and they moved on to something else. They're ignoring the majority issue.
It's got an emotional heft to it. It's got an emotional heft to it. But how do you jump from that to the conclusion that they didn't expect it ever to work? Because I believe that Braverman does lie in bed at night getting very excited when she dreams about refugees being deported to a country where refugees get shot. And indeed a country that her own Home Office offers asylum to people fleeing. I think that's what gets her going. I think that she loves all that. So she must have thought it was going to work.
I don't think she really cared whether it was going to work or not. She just wants that to happen because that's what she wants.
So you can get your kicks out of dreaming about it without putting much intellectual effort into working out its plausibility.
Why does she want it? Does she want it because she hates immigrants and she's got all these issues? She wants it because she thinks it's going to get her power.
Well, and also because she thinks if she can hurt enough other people, she might one day be happy herself.
Well, yeah, a lot of people try that, and it very seldom works, unfortunately.
Or that if she can just rise further up the ladder of the Conservative Party, then she might one day be happy herself. And that, of course, ties in with your notion that she's only doing it because this is what she thinks she needs to do to get ahead. It's an ugly old business, isn't it? And goodness me, they've had so long to get on top of things. You have to wonder quite whether they knew all along that they wouldn't. James is in Sheffield. James, what would you like to say?
Hello, James. Good to speak to you again.
Likewise.
Basically, I think it's really simple. The Rwanda policy.
You can't come on at the back end of a topic and say it's really simple, as if the rest of us are daft.
Well, apologies, and if
Carry on.
I prove to be wrong,
right,
you can get me.
I will. Right, let's go.
I think the Rwanda policy, I think they thought it was going to work, and as soon as it started to work, they would be able to expand it massively, whether it was different countries or whatever.
It still might work. I mean, again, it's one of those things that doesn't get properly reported. The reason why the court have rejected it so far is because Rwanda isn't safe. So what they need to do is cooperate with their colleagues in Rwanda and prove to a court that the plans for looking after these refugees are safe. It's not a given that it's going to fail. You just have to prove that they'll be safe. So they could,
this is it.
Yeah.
And the fact is, I mean, if it does, so for example, if they do pull it off, and so it's all based on the model of Australia, where they managed to do this with 3 or 4 different countries. And as soon as they managed to do it, Australia, as soon as they got that legislation through, and they literally shipped people, as soon as they turned up on the shores, straight off to these other countries, the model was broken because the people smuggled. Nobody's going to pay. No refugee is going to pay money when you aren't going to be able to stay there.
Yeah. So the failure to find safe countries to which people can be deported. I suppose Australia is not a signatory to the European Convention on Human Rights. That might be something they'll cite next.
Yeah. And obviously, if they manage to do... So when Braverman says she dreams of this, and Sunak said, we are going to do this, I think it was all based on the fact of presuming the success of that.
Yeah.
Because, as horrible as it is, I think it would work.
Except for the numbers. And, the fact that you have got, I don't know how many beds they've got in Rwanda. I don't even know if the thing that she was photographed cackling outside was actually a place where refugees were going to be housed. I read reports that it was just a completely random housing project.
Yeah, I think it was the test paper, to put it bluntly. The point of Rwanda was it's the beginning.
Yeah, fair enough.
So if they can do that, then they're going to sort of...
And they'll throw enough money at foreign governments until people agree to do it, which I think is what... I'm not as across the Australian model as you are, but I think that's what the Australians did. So then the question of why is it not working, why hasn't it worked, comes down again to bad planning or not realising in advance what hoops they were going to have to jump through. I think you're right. I don't know that it's simple. I mean, what you've come up with, there's a lot of variables in it. There's a lot of things that can't be proved, but it at least fits the mysteries that I've been puzzling over, which is why have they done something that was so obviously doomed to fail? You respond by saying, well, they didn't think it was doomed to fail. And they may have had a point. Maybe it wouldn't be doomed to fail. But no, I just don't see these countries queuing up. Every time they announce that they've done a deal with someone to take refugees from here, the country pops up, or someone from the country pops up, from the country's government pops up and says, sorry, no idea what you're talking about. Thank you, James. Last word on this to Greg, who's in Dublin. Greg, you got a minute. What's it going to be?
Very quickly, James, I think they've made a very straightforward calculation. Everything in the poll says this government is gone or this party is out of government next time round. The question is, how disastrous is that polling going to be?
Yeah.
So they're treating scraps of red meat to what remains of a core that they bought from UKIP with this kind of rhetoric.
But it doesn't work. But how? But to keep those people happy, that you have to hurt refugees. You have to harm them.
God help you, but spend a little bit of time on Twitter or Facebook. Logic doesn't apply to these people. This is about hate. This is about prejudice. They don't need it to work. They just need to be told that, yes, you're prejudiced.
You hate them too. It's the Trump. It's the Trump model. It's the Trump model. Yes. I don't care what the policies are. I don't care whether they work. I don't care whether you build a wall or not. I love the fact that someone in public, high profile, in government, hates these people as much as I do for the same reason I hate them. Ergo, they're foreign. In fact, so deep is my hatred that I'll even embrace people of colour showing hatred towards refugees, despite the fact that goes against so many of my other prejudices.
That's precisely the thing.
You're very good. You brought me, hey, don't spoil it. You brought me in bang on time. I love it. Thank you.
Okay.
Cheers, Craig. Right, there you go. That's it from me for today. If you missed any of it, you can listen back on Catch Up on Global Player. Rewind, of course. We could rewind now, right back to 10 o'clock and hear 11 o'clock even, and hear Keir Starmer not massively answering many of the questions that I asked him. You'll also find all of LBC's shows to catch up on, as well as the world's biggest podcast. So do Rewind Live Radio on Global Player. Download it for free from your app store or head to globalplayer.com. Ben Kentish with you at 4. Sheila Fogarty with you now.
I'm going to pick up on the Keir Starmer, or some of what Keir Starmer said to you about whether he would be able to go to university now, if that were his time, under this government. And this business of Eton going north and 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 going north